You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A community coalition called Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management says Detroit's bankruptcy under an emergency manager appointed by the governor was done on the backs of Detroit workers and its largely impoverished African-American population. City assets were sold off to private corporations. Coalition spokesperson Fred Vitale says workers had their cut and even had money into retirement annuity accounts from their own wages clawed back to go towards city.
Bankruptcy and the payment of debt is being done on the backs of Detroit workers and retirees and the overwhelmingly poor African-American residents of the city. The alternative is the restoration of state revenue cuts and a very serious effort to reclaim the money that the banks have drained from the city through predatory lending and foreclosure.
Vitale says a people's plan proposed by the coalition would have resolved Detroit's financial issues while protecting workers. Vitale says workers didn't cause Detroit's financial problems and should not have their pension money taken.
Those problems were caused, in our opinion, by structural racism, redlining, things like that took place in the past, plans of fiscal austerity that have extended for over 30 years, and enormous job losses. Those are the root causes of the financial problems of Detroit.
FCC Chair Tom Wheeler was greeted by protesters carrying a Save the Internet banner at his home Monday. The PopularResistance.org protesters support net neutrality or internet equality. Wheeler's FCC is considering changes that could lead to internet speed tiers favoring large corporations over people. President Obama Monday called on the FCC to defend net neutrality.
The idea of net neutrality has unleashed the power of the internet and given innovators the chance to thrive. Abandoning these principles would threaten to end the internet as we know it. And that's why I'm urging the Federal Communications Commission to do everything they can to protect net neutrality for everyone.
Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance, says that all people must have equal access to internet content without discrimination. She says wealthy corporations should not get faster internet delivery service than startups and citizens groups.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they're still right on. Go ahead, this time is my time. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. So I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today. Lots of things to get to as we continue our week-long look at how do we stop fast track? How do we stop another one of these horribly destructive for the middle class free trade agreements? How do we stop more consolidation of wealth at the top at the expense of the rest of us in the form of these insane trade agreements, things that we already should know by now. I mean, it's been 20 years of looking backwards at the effect of NAFTA. We should know from just the last 20 years of, are you better off now than you were 20 years ago? And the answer is no. As much as you might like to say, well, yes, no. Especially for those in the middle class, as the middle class continues to be squeezed. And, I go back to myself, 20 some years ago, I was making considerably more money than I make now, which is hard to believe. Really, really kind of hard to believe. And I think a lot of people feel that same way. I talked to a number of people. I think of the woman I met the other day who, was telling me back in the early 80s, she had a wonderful job that was actually paying more than she makes today, with health care that, you took the little card into the doctors, and there was no copay, there were no deductibles, there were no sweating out, am I in the right doctor's office? There was none of that. It was, I have this card, I have health insurance, I am covered. Not, do I have to stay in network, or is this a participating provider, or is this the preferred plan, or any of that stuff. It was, I had a card because I paid for health insurance. And if I needed care, I got care. And, she went on this long, basically saying, Rick, I listen to the show. I love what you do. And you are so right. Why is it we don't hear anyone else saying this? And I would argue, basically, the reality is we have a corporate dominated media. There are very few independent programs like this one out there on the air. And the sad reality is we're not able to, because of the big money that we're up against, to expand as much as we should be able to. And, I like what the president said yesterday about net neutrality. If the internet now is something that I have to pay to access, even greater than we already do, then that again shuts off those voices. And, a lot more people are starting to go look at the mainstream media with a jaundiced eye and start looking for alternative ideas. And that's where I think programs like this one and others are so vital. But, I think of this woman in the vein that, back in the early 80s, she was doing better than she is now. And we're talking, 30 some years later, and not adjusted for inflation and no trickery, actual life better. And that's where I think the Democrats really need to figure out how they get back to the language of the working people. And what we need to be able to do is start holding these multinationals accountable. And more free trade agreements, more power is not the answer. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of that. Education in the first hour, which I don't know if you've seen the stories coming out. There was another assault in the Philadelphia school district, third or fourth of this one school already this year, because they don't have the staff to keep the peace, if you will, because the funding isn't there. And we're going to talk about a lawsuit that was just filed yesterday, I believe, against the Department of Education and outgoing Governor Tom Corbett, because of the insane funding mechanisms that we have. There's no rational thought to them, in my view. We'll talk about that. Also, the York City School District thing, they're still pushing for charters. And it's going to take a lot more organizing, a lot more pushing, but things I think like the lawsuit to help get that district the funding that it needs so that you don't have to starve out the teachers and starve out the parents and everyone, the students and everyone else. So we'll get to that. Also, the trade thing big today, a little bit on Obamacare. We got lots of stuff to talk about. But first, I want to take a couple of minutes. It is Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to all of the veterans in our country. Nothing but honor and respect I have for the people who have fought in the wars, even if I don't agree with them. Even if I think going into Iraq and Afghanistan were horrible ideas, even if you don't think the Vietnam War was right, I still honor and value the people who fought and bled and suffered. Their sacrifice for our country, even if it is under the wrong circumstances, still just hugely important that we remember their sacrifice and honor them, and not just in words, not just today and go, well, happy day, here's a coupon to go to the local big box retail, or here's 10% off your meal at the local franchise chain restaurants. No, I think you need to, and I think Obama has done a lot of this. We need to take care of the people who need the help, and not question or make them prove that, oh, well, this happened, that we need to take care of them. And, let our actions be our guide, not our words, which is why I think it's very important that we elect politicians who not just are willing to put people into harm's way, but also are willing to fund all of the programs that they need when they come back to help them and their families. The last several years have been disgraceful in this country, that we've allowed veterans to lose their homes, that we've allowed employers to fire veterans when they've gone off and been deployed. Deplorable. An absolute disgrace. And no one should stand for it. But on this day, I think it is important to remember those who have fought in past wars. And I always think of my grandfather, who never once talked about his time in the service. I got all of those things secondhand from relatives that knew of his past, and it's one of those things that when you see craziness, you block it out, and that was the kind of guy he was. The only thing I ever remember him saying about the military was when the Marine recruiter came to the house, and he basically he pushed him out the door quickly and said, "If you join the military, I will kill you myself." And the only thing he ever talked about, and that really stuck with me. But here again, I think of all of the people that I've known over the years. I think of the people when I was a kid growing up in the projects on the west side of Cleveland, who were coming back from the Vietnam War and just dumped into our society. I had hoped that we would never see that again. And like I said, I think Obama's doing a much better job than the Bush administration did. And I hope whoever is next will continue that and make it better even still. But I remember those guys coming back with broken bodies, broken minds, horrible drug and alcohol problems. And you go, where were the people who were calling them heroes then? Oh, that's right, they weren't. And that's where I think this time around a lot different and a lot better. Even if I don't agree with either cause, I still think we need to take care of those people because, at the end of the day, those are folks like us. Those are the people who, I always think of the Black Sabbath song. It's the poor who die for their wars. It's the working class who die in these wars. And on today, especially, I want to extend my thank you to all veterans, and the assurance that I will do what I can and what I am able to make sure that they are taken care of, and that they are truly honored as heroes instead of just photo ops. To me, that's the least I think we can do. I would be interested in your stories. If you've got stories about relatives, veterans in your family, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I would love to hear those stories. I often think about my grandfather, like I said, who never talked about it. His uniform was still in the back, but I do have one picture of him in his uniform, and wow, he was a skinny guy. That's and a tough guy. He was somebody that didn't take anything off of anyone. And, there's the part of me that thinks that generation, that greatest generation that came back from fighting World War II, brought that fight back to the job site, brought that fight back to their communities to make things better, not just for individuals, but for the entire community. And to me, that's important. And I look at these fights for education, for good, decent jobs, for infrastructure, for all of these things back at home that generation of veterans fought for. I'm certain that this generation of veterans will as well, because it really is all about our children, so that they never have to fight the same things we have fought in the past. So thank you for your service. We're going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon highway, I saw above me.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is Your World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, the leaders of Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. The High Court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan into South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan in 2011. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WFP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we would rely less on the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Clement Lowndes. Conservative media figures are using Republican electoral gains in the midterm election to renew calls to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Here's how Fox News and ABC contributor Laura Ingraham framed the electoral results on her radio show.
We don't have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. At the same time, we do have electoral results that indicate the country hates Obamacare, want to get rid of it, replace it with something else.
Conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh suggested that electoral wins give Congress a mandate to work against President Obama's policies.
Individual Republican candidates won, and they won big. They won in a wave landslide running against Obamacare. It is the biggest and perhaps the most important mandate a political party has had in the recent era. It is to stop Barack Obama. It is to stop the Democrat Party. There is no other reason why Republicans were elected yesterday.
But according to a recent Rasmussen poll, a minority, only 39% of, quote, likely U.S. voters want Congress to repeal Obamacare in its entirety and start over again. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And all you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligning, no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement. Anything in life.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So during the break, I got an email that pointed out there another attack last week in the Bartram High School, I believe it is, in Philadelphia. I guess it's the fourth of the year. And I look at this and I go, this is the reason that you need to have actual people in the hallways to, like guidance counselors and security people and I don't know, librarians and maybe even a nurse, maybe just a thought, maybe especially in a district that last year had 2 students die at school in schools that didn't have a nurse that day. To me, the funding part of this is so important. And I can't believe that it's really taken this long. And it's something for the last couple of years I've been saying has to happen. Well, finally, it is happening. 2 parents in the Philadelphia school district, as well as superintendents from schools across the state, a number of them, and we'll get to that, have now filed a lawsuit against outgoing Governor Tom Corbett and the Department of Education. Here to talk a little bit about it, I've asked the attorney Mike Churchill. He is with the Public Interest Law Center there in Philadelphia. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rick.
So I look at this, and I've been calling for some action in Philadelphia and really across the state over the insane way that we fund education, because I've yet to have anyone really explain how we do it the same way that the next person explains it. It's this weird hodgepodge formula, or am I missing something?
You're absolutely right. It is one of the strangest, most weird and unfair system that is imaginable. We have people with tax rates in ranging from about the equivalent of 9 mills to 36 mills. We have school districts that have available $9,000 to $26,000, $28,000 per kid, and it just so happens that the places that have the highest tax rates have the least amount to spend. It is really irrational.
And this is another one of those situations as the state continues to walk away from education and turn its back on the future of our kids. It puts communities, especially poorer communities, at a major disadvantage.
Absolutely. The critical source of the problem is that Pennsylvania has one of the lowest contributions of state appropriations to funding districts, schools as in the country. In fact, 2 years ago, they were the third lowest in the country. About a third of the 34% of the funding for the cost of education comes from the state. The rest is a burden on local taxpayers. And that's the reason there's a problem, because some of those districts are relatively wealthy and some are not. And the ones that are not do not get enough money from the state to make up the difference.
Yeah. And what I get all the time when I talk about this is, well, that's a Philadelphia problem, Rick. It's not our backyard, but yet I look at the number of school districts that are in this suit, because the Philadelphia school district is not, because it's obviously run by the state, so the state wouldn't choose to sue itself, but 2 parents in the district plus a number of other what I would consider rural districts have filed in on this.
Right. Well, actually, there are districts from all over the state. There are 2 rural districts, Panther Valley School District in Carbon County and Shenandoah Valley School District in Schuylkill County. There are reasonable-sized cities. Lancaster is one. Wilkes-Barre School District is another. Greater Johnstown out in Cambria County. This is a problem that is all across the state. In addition, the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools, PARS as it's called, which represents 150 mostly rural and small schools, and mostly in the western part of the state, is also a plaintiff in this matter, because so many of its members are hurting from the lack of sufficient funding.
So let me walk through this then, because as I understand, there was a suit filed about 15 years ago on the same kind of grounds, that the court, I guess, ruled that they couldn't make a decision. I guess that's how it went. Explain that to me.
Well, the court did not rule on the merits of that case, as you said, but instead the court said there's no way we can tell whether the Constitution, which calls for a thorough and efficient system of public schools, is being met, because it's just not a justiciable standard that we can decide whether the Constitution is being complied with, and therefore we'll leave it to the General Assembly to handle on their own. But there's been important changes since that decision was made. Principally, we no longer allow school districts to decide what will be taught. We have state standards of what students need to learn, what the districts need to teach, and we have state exams, the PSSAs and now the Keystone exams, which students will be required to pass in order to get a graduation degree from any district. So the state legislature has really told us now what is necessary for a adequate education, and they've also told us how much it would cost, because they commissioned a study in 2007 to look into that very issue, and that study came back and said $4.4 billion more money would be needed, either state or locally, to enable districts to be able to have enough personnel, enough textbooks, enough laboratories, and all the supports necessary in order for students to be able to meet the state standards.
So we now have, because of the centralization by the Department of Education, now we have a standard then, huh?
That's it. We've centralized that decision-making process. We now have the standard and we have the cost, and therefore we think that the court can say, consistent with our earlier opinion, we can go forward and decide whether or not the legislature is complying with the constitutional mandate. And there's also another constitutional mandate, which is the Equal Protection Clause, which says that you have to treat fairly and equally districts throughout the Commonwealth. And we think that one has not been complied with. That was not at issue in the 1990s cases, and the court has never said that matter should not be heard by a court. So we're confident that this matter is not going to be easily thrown out this time, and if the court were to look at the merits, we don't see any defense. Frankly, this is totally irrational.
Yeah, because I don't see how you can have any argument for fairness when you look at some school districts that I've seen are spending as little as $9,000 per student, when you see some that are spending as much as $28,000 per student. I don't know how you could argue that that's a thorough and efficient system, or fair for that matter.
Absolutely. There's just no way you can make that argument. There's wonderful examples in the lawsuit that talk about how Panther Valley taxes at twice the rate, about 22 mills compared to the 11 mills that are taxed in Lower Marion. Lower Marion raises $20,000 almost with that 11 mills, that 20 and Panther Valley raises $2,000 with theirs. The state makes up some of that difference. They give Panther Valley significantly more money than they give to Lower Marion, but it still leaves $6,000 or more difference between them. This is just a crazy system where people who pay the highest taxes still have the least amount to spend.
Yeah, and to me, it's another one of those examples of it. And I have a number of my Tea Party friends who love to point their finger at me and say, I want redistribution of wealth. And I go, yeah, I'd like to redistribute it back to the way my grandparents envisioned it. Not like this, because what you've just laid out to me sounds like a massive, not just a massive benefit of opportunity, but a massive redistribution of wealth, as you've got, the poorer families paying double, or if not more, of their income in property taxes to fund half an education. It seems insane to me, but it is what our system appears to be.
It makes no sense. And actually, you could go back to the 1874 debates when this Constitution was passed, and they knew that was going to be a problem. The Western districts were adamant that you needed to have enough state funding in the system in order for them to be able to provide the same kind of education that was available in the wealthy eastern districts of the state. Now, today, that problem is really all over the state. Okay, it is the wealthy suburban districts in the western suburbs of Pittsburgh, and in the western and suburbs of Philadelphia, and in a few other well-to-do communities that happen to be lucky enough to have a mall or a shopping center of some sort to pay these taxes that are necessary. But other communities can't do it. they need the support from the state in order to be able to provide the full services that the state says are necessary for students to succeed these days.
Yeah. I listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Michael Churchill. He's an attorney with the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia. Their group, along with a number of others, have filed a lawsuit against outgoing Governor Tom Corbett and the Department of Education over its what they're saying irrational school funding systems. I look at this, and I got one of the questions that popped into my head is as we've centralized what schools can do, and we've centralized curriculum, and we've done all of these things. It seems to me, I love to hear the people say unfunded mandate, but it kind of sounds like, one of these unfunded mandates that we've heaped down on these schools with these tests that, private companies seem to make a fortune off of. It just seems to me to be another one of those moments where we've benefited a handful at the expense of all of us and then not paid for it.
That's right. And, there's real harm from this system. One of the things that's really important to remember is that there are a lot of kids that are losing out. One of the individual plaintiffs who was at the press conference when this suit was announced yesterday, talked about how she had originally been in the Upper Moreland, Montgomery County school district, and her older daughter got a good basic education there, and then she moved to the William Penn district in Delaware County, and all of a sudden all the things that they took for granted in this other school were not available. No computer labs, no textbooks to bring home, so she couldn't help her daughter with her younger daughter with her education because all she got was a worksheet, right, and nothing that said what she was supposed to be learning. And similar and no advanced courses when she got to high school. And all the things that were sort of common in a well-to-do district all of a sudden became scarce and made a real difference in whether her younger daughter is going to be able to succeed as well as her older daughter did.
Because I've often wondered, as a parent in one of those districts, I've often wondered if there's not a lawsuit possible for saying, look, my kid doesn't have this opportunity, therefore earning potential is not there. There are numerous studies out there that show that if kids are lost by the third grade, they never catch up. And then there's that, the school to prison pipeline. Could you not sue that by not being able to have that thorough and efficient public education, you've lost the ability to earn, and that there would be some monetary number to be able to put to that?
Look, this is a very competitive world that our kids are growing up in. All right, and the students who are in the same labor market are going to be competing with each other for the good jobs. And if you haven't learned the skills, the math skills, the ability to write and communicate, you're not going to be able to compete. If you haven't had outlets of music and art so that you can find other things that you're good at, you're not going to be able to find alternative ways of going forward in this world. It is really scary when you think about how different we're treating children. Some children get $25,000 a year spent on them. Some children get $9,000 a year. You multiply that by 12 years, that's a huge difference. It means much smaller class size, much more personal attention and help, much more backup support so that the other kids in your class who may be causing disturbances can get the help they needed so that you can learn. These are all vital things, and we invest as a public huge amounts in some kids and very little in others. That's just not fair.
And to me, it goes back, and maybe you'll disagree, but it goes back to John Edwards in 2004 talking about the two Americas, and this one of those moments where you can go two very different Americas, and I believe it's not based on race or anything like that, just based on poverty and in your zip code.
Absolutely, and one of the things that's the most ironic is that Governor Ridge long ago campaigned, I can remember, and saying it should not matter what zip code you live in, how much is spent on your schools. And nevertheless, our state has failed to live up to that campaign promise. Many governors say it when they're campaigning, but when it comes to appropriating money, all of a sudden they're much more worried about giving into the no tax pledges. You can't provide what is needed without raising state revenues and then using that in order to help the districts that need it the most. And that's what Pennsylvania has failed on. We should stop putting this huge burden on the local taxpayer and put it on the state, where they have the resources to raise that kind of money much more fairly than competing districts, some of which are very small. I mean, we have districts in the state, the average size is about 2,000 students, and it makes it very difficult for many of them to fairly raise the revenues that are necessary to pay for schools of quality.
Right. But don't you know, Michael, the money doesn't matter? You can't throw money at a problem.
Right. That's what everybody says, except for the schools that their kids go to.
Yeah,
all right.
There you go. And like my old man always said, money doesn't matter until you don't have it.
That's we're proving that. Okay.
Yeah. I think the test scores.
We can see that in the test scores, which are went down when the cuts came in, and which are poorer and not as good in the districts that don't have the money. You just can't have 35 kids in a classroom and do as well when as students who are in a classroom with 20 kids and get teachers' attention who can fix problems as they're before they become real and difficult.
Yep. As I always say, I'd like to have my kid and all kids have the opportunity that our president's kids got at the laboratory school there in Washington, D.C. About 8 to 10 kids in a class and none of this idiotic standardized testing. But Michael, as this continues down the road, I'd love to have you back and keep us informed and updated and how this is going.
Well, thank you for paying attention to this really important problem, Rick.
Yeah,
there's nothing more fundamental than making sure that we have good schools to support the economy of the state, to make sure that people are able to earn a living when they grow up and support families and lead a life that you and I hope everyone can lead.
Yeah, and as I've been saying, education is the hill that the middle class must die on, because this is our kids' future. Michael Churchill, I appreciate the time, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
It is believed that a little hard work is good for the soul. If this is true, then the history of child workers in the United States is a soulful tale. The first child laborers landed in Virginia in the year 1619. These immigrant children found slave working conditions and poverty wages in the New World. As the years passed, little changed. The average child worker toiled 16 to 18 hours per day, 6 days a week in factories and textile mills. Education was a luxury, and many believed a loss on working children. Charles Harding, president of the Merchants Woolen Company, stated, "There is such a thing as too much education for working people sometimes. I have seen cases where young people are spoiled for labor by too much refinement." Labor unions, consumer groups, and parent coalitions all work to shorten hours, ease conditions, and ultimately end exploitive child abuses. Baby strikes in Paterson, New Jersey, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, demanding 11 and 12-hour workdays were fought vehemently by mill and factory owners. The Pennsylvania legislature was the first to consider prohibiting child workers in 1833, and consider is all Pennsylvania did until July of 1903, when Mother Jones led the March of the Mill Children from Philadelphia to Oyster Bay, New York, in an attempt to influenced President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1836, Massachusetts was the first state to pass a law restricting the use of children in manufacturing. And 102 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Walsh-Healy Act restricting the use of child labor is constitutional. Also in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which put more stringent restrictions on the use of child labor. While hard work teaches discipline, self-reliance, and responsibility, the exploitive nature of our past must remind us that what we have today, we mustn't take for granted, for the days of tomorrow are doomed to repeat if we ignore those lessons hard learned. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
You know, I got to tell you, I'm glad to see that someone has filed a lawsuit and at least moving forward on deciding what is a fair and just and equitable funding system. It makes no sense to me. And I'm glad to see also that it just wasn't Philadelphia, that it was school districts across the state. And I can guarantee you, of the ones that weren't on the list, I'm sure there are 100 or 200 more that would like to be, but fear repercussion. Because, you know, this is a political matter as well. And I think what's going on right now is you're seeing kind of a push by this outgoing administration to continue this charterization and the profitization of education, which is why I think as the report came out, that the chief recovery officer there in the York City School District, this Meckley guy, he's pushing heavily for them to charterize the school. Here to talk a little bit about it, I've asked a teacher from the York City School District to come talk with us, Clovis Gallen. Clovis, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, you're welcome, Rick, and thanks for giving us a voice on this matter. Once again, this is my third time being on your show. I really do appreciate it. And, you know, this is not something that's just going to affect the York City School District. This is going to affect, you know, people urban schools all across the state. So, people really need to pay attention to what's going on here in York, because if it happens to us, they're probably going to try to, you know, push the model in other places that are economically depressed.
Well, I would argue not just urban schools, Clovis, because if you look at the lawsuit that was filed yesterday, there were a number of rural districts. In fact, the Association of Rural Schools actually signed on to the lawsuit because they're being squeezed too. Everybody's being, especially the poorer school districts, are being squeezed because of this governor's, unfortunately, this outgoing governor's horrible education policy. But still, it's been a 20-year path to get here as we've divided education into profit mode of education and public schools, which is why I think the battlefront where you're at, and I had hoped, honestly, Clovis, that this was now dead since the last vote that just happened, but evidently not.
Well, the last vote, I think a lot of people, even around in my hometown of York, had a misunderstanding about what the last vote was about. The last vote was just about a blended option that he wanted to put on the table. It was a compromise of sorts. Many people in the community were dead set against charters coming in, and they wanted to continue on with the internal transformation model. He doesn't believe that model can work. Well, that's his excuse for doing what he's doing anyway. So he tried to, meet everyone in the middle. The school board decided at the last meeting that they did not want that model to be one of the choices. Because of that, now he's going to push for his full charter conversion, such as he did yesterday at the committee meeting, and he wants them to vote on the decision next Wednesday at the school board meeting.
Oh, that quickly. And I understand there's a draft agreement that they have with one of the with this Charter Schools USA. What happened to Mosaica?
Well, I guess Charter Schools USA turned out to be the lesser of two evils, so to speak. Mosaica has a lot of financial issues, and I guess they weren't as viable an option as Charter Schools USA was. But I personally believe that Charter Schools USA shouldn't be an option. They have some financial issues going on with their charter school company as well. They weed out students to keep the best students, to try to justify, their test scores. They also have they've had issues where students were sexually assaulted on the campus of their schools. They had their assets frozen in Florida because a parent filed for a $5.25 million lawsuit and actually won. So Charter Schools USA just has a checkered past. I have a lot of documentation and information on them that I'm going to forward to the school board so they can understand exactly what they're going to be subjecting our students here in York City to, if they choose to make that decision.
Yeah, the picking and choosing part is an interesting one because I've seen that. I've seen claims of that in a lot of districts, Washington, D.C. being the place where, the cream of the cream they put into these charter schools, and they still don't do better, which is kind of weird to me. If I got to pick the best team, you would think, if you're a half-decent coach or if you've got a half-decent product, you'd do a lot better, but they don't, and that's the weird thing to me.
Very true. One of the reasons why they don't do better is because they don't have the best staff. They have a very high turnover rate with their teaching staff. They don't pay them a competitive wage when you talk about the neighboring school districts. And that's exactly what would happen here at York. They would offer them, salaries that weren't nearly as competitive, benefits that weren't nearly as competitive. So the only people that you're going to have come and working at these charter schools are people who are just out of high school or can't get jobs anywhere else. And it turns out to be a stepping stone for them. They're under lots of pressure to conform to the hours of work that the charter school would like for them to work for. They're at-will employees. They have no union protection at all. So it's hard to work under those conditions for that amount of money when if you're qualified to be able to work anywhere else or teach anywhere else, that you can work for a better salary with better benefits.
Well, I would argue that their hope is that they can charterize everything and make those kind of conditions the standard condition, and thus forcing everybody into that. I would think that's their model. But as I look at this, I wouldn't know that I would want my kids going to them. I know they're sold and they're sold as the next greatest thing, but in looking at the facts, not so much.
Well, I can tell you this. The owner of Charter Schools USA lives in Florida. His own children don't go to the charter schools that he owns. He sends them off to private schools, and there have been some questions raised by his own staff about why he doesn't send his own kids to his own schools if they're supposed to be, the best schools available.
That's exactly the point that I've always made about public education. I think that there should be public education and that those people, their kids should be in there as well. And that's one of the things I liked about Tom Wolf, the new governor-elect. His kids actually went to public school. And because he could have easily, with the means, taken him somewhere else, but he actually pushed to try and make the public schools better. And I think that that's the important part of this. If you bring everybody into the community, you're going to have that push to make everything better for everyone, and not just the handful who can fill out the paperwork or who can get there on the second Tuesday of the third month of the 8th year and figure out how to navigate the system, or be able to put in the 20 free hours a week that you'd have to do to come into the school to get your kid in.
I mean, and that's exactly right. Tom Wolf, came out on record and said that he's against the charterization of the school district of the city of York. And Netley said in the papers yesterday that he's had conversations with him even after the election, but he won't disclose what was shared in those conversations. I mean, I would think that the information that he got from the governor was information that he didn't want to hear, so therefore he pushed to make this move before the new governor came into place. You know, it just all seems too fast with absolutely no community support. I have yet to hear a voice in this community that says this is something that should happen for our kids. Not to mention, if it would happen, there would be absolutely no public school option if you charter every single building in the district.
Right.
If a parent chooses, if public schools are supposed to be about choice. Well, I choose public education. My kids attend York City schools. If they would charterize every single building in the district, what option does that leave for me?
Yeah, there's that choice argument that my some of the charter people who beat up on me you'd like to have choice, wouldn't you? I go, no, I want to make sure that the schools are better for everybody. That's the choice. We make them better. We invest in them. If things aren't working right, you fix them. But you invest in that institution so that it's there for everyone. At least that's my view on it.
You're exactly right. You know, we've had billions of dollars cut from public education over the last since Tom Corbett's been in office. And now you're seeing the repercussions of that, especially in urban school districts such as York City. You know, the cutting of teachers, the cutting of staff, the cutting of resources, the cutting of programs. And then you're telling these kids that they have to perform at the same rate as the neighboring school districts, when we have 86% of our student population that come from economically depressed homes are receiving free or reduced lunch. We have 36 or 37% of our students are special education students. Another 30% of the students are ELL students. And if you're in the country for 1 year, even if you are an ELL student, you still have to take the Keystone exams or the PSSA exams, and your scores are still counted. You know, with all those obstacles in the way, I still think that our school has made progress over the last year. Now, they're doing what they can to try to skew the numbers and make it seem as if we're not progressing. But if you compare our school district to other urban school districts across the state, we're actually ahead of the curve.
And to me, the whole problem with this, Clovis, is, we've taken these standardized tests. And look, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. Standardized tests were not something my mind was really geared toward. I've read a couple of research studies on this when you're talking about the differences in taking these standardized tests between urban areas, especially high poverty urban areas and white upper class suburban areas. They're two very different types of learners. And to say that this one, test that you have X amount of time to do, and it has to be, with all of this pressure put on it, to me, in what I've read, seems to be another one of those disadvantaged moments for those who are in the poverty situation.
Well, definitely. I mean, there's always going to be some kind of test bias when you talk about, what kids from. I'm just thinking about kids that come from some of the county high schools, what they're exposed to, as far as the language they're exposed to, the vocabulary they're exposed to, the different social aspects or cultural backgrounds that they come from. When you just talk about language in a test and test bias, kids that come from economically depressed areas just may not be exposed to the same language, may not be exposed to the same vocabulary. So when they see some of these terms, or they see they have trouble comprehension, just what the question's asking itself. And I mean, just imagine an ELL student who doesn't even speak English coming into the country, being here after 1 year, and having to take a test like that, and then having their test counted. And you have 30% of your more than 30% of your student population in that category, but yet they have to take a test like that. But you use that. Okay, you use that data to say, okay, your school isn't progressing. We need to come in and privatize your whole school, and turn it over to a for-profit charter corporation and have the tax dollars go off to that company with no oversight or no regulation.
Seems kind of dumb to me.
I agree. I think it's backwards. And Tom Corbett, clearly, I mean, his biggest donors were some of his biggest individual donors are charter school corporations the people from the Marcellus Shale gas industry. You know, he's put some of his cronies into place to push his agenda, and that's what David. I call him David G. Meckley. I call him by his full name. I put the G in there like an assassin because he's trying to assassinate public education here in York, Pennsylvania. So I call him David G. Meckley, and he's pushed him down here to push that agenda.
There you go, like G. Gordon Liddy. But here's the thing. I was reading through some of the things you tweeted out, and I'm often amazed at the schemes and all of the different things that pop up. But in the one thing you tweeted out, they're talking about different school districts where parents had to actually go in and donate X amount of labor. Like 30 hours of labor a year, or they could, if they were wealthy enough, they could buy their way out of it for like $20 an hour. And, I started thinking that, this really is just about getting free labor and cheating people out of wages. Because, the more my initial reaction to this, last year when I first came around is this is just a way to bludgeon the teachers over the head and steal from them. And the more of this comes out, the more that just seems to be the reality. This is about putting teachers back into the old days, as my one friend who's a retired PSEA member said. Back when we were reliant on little Johnny or Susie to bring in apples, everyone loved us because we couldn't buy our own. But as soon as we said we want to buy our own apple, and maybe even, who knows, a pear, that's when all of this stuff started happening. So I got to wonder if that's just it. It is that simple, because I can't come up with any other solution than that.
Well, there's definitely a lot of union busting going on, and I can speak to some of the numbers because it's public record. If you read the recovery plan, it's online. You can go to the school district's website and download it and read it, and you can see the numbers right there for yourself in black and white. But people don't really understand what those percentages mean. And I can tell you what they mean in dollars and cents. They're talking about like 10% the first year in the recovery plan, 9.8% the second year, another 10 the third year, and around another 10 the fourth year in the plan. So wow. That amounts to about just under $30,000, a $30,000 pay cut for the average teacher salary in York City School District. Just under $30,000 a year. And that's just salary. Okay. Your insurance premium also goes up if you have a family like I do, to $400 per pay. And then you have a deductible, which is $4,000 until your insurance even kicks in. And they want you to work more days per year and add more time onto each school day.
That's insane. That sounds insane. What that sounds to me, and it sounds to me as they're throwing something out they know no one in their right mind, no matter how much they love teaching, could possibly ever accept, so that they get to the inevitable place of we can privatize it.
Bingo. I mean, this was his agenda the entire time. He just, I was speaking to someone yesterday. His job was to come down here, develop a plan, okay, that he knew that wouldn't be able to be followed, so he could have a reason to justify charterizing the entire district. He can point the finger at someone else and make it seem as if, it's the teacher's fault because they would not take the new deal, or it's the teacher's fault because the students didn't make any progress, or it's the parent's fault because they feel like that the students don't have a safe environment. I mean, his job was to come down here, formulate a plan, put benchmarks in there that he knew would not be able to be met. When the benchmarks weren't met, he would be able to turn the district over to charters. And there's a catch-all in the recovery plan anyway. If any one item of the recovery plan isn't met, anything, it doesn't matter. So theoretically, the teachers could have accepted the deal, and he could have turned around and said, you know what, students aren't meeting their achievement goals, so we're going to turn the district over anyway. Or he could have said the students feel like we took a survey and we feel like the environment isn't safe in the city school district. We're going to turn the district over to charters anyway. So I mean, he could have theoretically came up with any reason he wanted to turn the district over to charters, and that was his goal. And we can kind of see that now, especially with Corbett not being reelected, and now he's really pushing it. After we had the board meeting we had about a month ago, and the entire community came out in force and said, we don't want this for our kids. But yet he's still pushing it anyway.
I got 30 seconds left. The last question I've got for you, what is this chaos doing to the kids, though? I mean, that's what bothers me. What happens to these kids in their opportunity?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are up in arms. I mean, parents that I talked to said my kids aren't going to any charter school. Any charter school that he says that he's going to turn it over to. So what options do they have? And the students are asking questions. Students are coming in, one of my players came to me today and said, Coach, what's going on? Are we turning over? Are we going charter next year? Or are you going to be here? Are we going to be here? What's going on? I mean, everyone's raising questions about the whole situation because they don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. Teachers don't feel safe. Students don't feel comfortable with it. So,
well, we've got a lot of work to do. And Clovis, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
No problem, Rick. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A community coalition called Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management says Detroit's bankruptcy under an emergency manager appointed by the governor was done on the backs of Detroit workers and its largely impoverished African-American population. City assets were sold off to private corporations. Coalition spokesperson Fred Vitale says workers had their pensions and health care cut and even had money they had put into retirement annuity accounts from their own wages clawed back to go towards city debt.
The bankruptcy and the payment of debt is being done on the backs of Detroit workers and retirees and the overwhelmingly poor African-American residents of the city. The alternative is the restoration of state revenue cuts and a very serious effort to reclaim the money that the banks have drained from the city through predatory lending and foreclosure.
Vitale says a people's plan proposed by the coalition would have resolved Detroit's financial issues while protecting workers. Vitale says workers didn't cause Detroit's financial problems and should not have their pension money taken.
Those problems were caused, in our opinion, by structural racism, redlining, things like that took place in the past, plans of fiscal austerity that have extended for over 30 years, and enormous job losses. Those are the root causes of the financial problems of Detroit.
FCC Chair Tom Wheeler was greeted by protesters carrying a Save the Internet banner at his home Monday. The popularresistance.org protesters support net neutrality or internet equality. Wheeler's FCC is considering changes that could lead to internet speed tiers favoring large corporations over people. President Obama Monday called on the FCC to defend net neutrality.
The idea of net neutrality has unleashed the power of the internet and given innovators the chance to thrive. Abandoning these principles would threaten to end the internet as we know it. And that's why I'm urging the Federal Communications Commission to do everything they can to protect net neutrality for everyone.
Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance, says that all people must have equal access to internet content without discrimination. She says wealthy corporations should not get faster internet delivery service than startups and citizens groups.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
Everybody's got a price. Everybody's gonna pay. Cause the $1 million man always gets his way.
That's not the truth. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Our quote of the day out of the piece WTO in Seattle 15 years ago. Stan Sorscher writes, it's all about power relationships. Who will decide how we divide wealth? To me, that encapsulate this entire argument over these free trade agreements. Who decides who gets what? And, it goes back to my high school government teacher saying, that's what government does. It decides who gets what. And sadly, for too long, our government, with trade deals in hand, have been deciding that working people, you'll get nothing and you'll like it. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about the big week of action as we attempt to stop fast track. I've asked the author, Stan Sorscher, labor representative at SPEEA, and also the president of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, to come talk with us. Stan, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be on your show.
I look at that one line you wrote, which is incredibly powerful. These trade agreements, all this stuff that we're being shoveled, it's really about power relationships and how we divvy up the wealth between the handfuls at the expense of the rest of us.
Washington State, I live in Seattle, and Washington State prides itself on being pro-trade, and I'm pro-trade. Everybody I know is pro-trade. So when we talk about trade issues, we start off on the wrong foot. It really isn't about trade at all. Everybody is pretty much agreed, that we should trade. The question is how. And if you talk about the power relationship, suddenly this becomes a much easier conversation to have. You're not talking about trade versus protectionism, or globalization isn't going to go away. We're talking about how are we going to manage our own futures. And there was a ambassador who came to Seattle, and he gave me this great bumper sticker. He said businesses are going to just love how these new trade agreements are going to go, because after all, their lobbyists are negotiating them. And he said these agreements will determine how life is organized in 2050. And I thought, that sounds one way coming out of his mouth, but it sounds completely different when I say it. I'm not sure I'm going to like how he wants to organize my life in 2050. That's what politics is for, to have the voice of civil society and all stakeholders heard. And he's telling me that these corporate lobbyists are going to determine how my life is organized in 2050. That's a power relationship.
Yes.
And it isn't about tariffs or quotas or any of that other boring stuff. This is the essence of democracy and political process.
And the other part of it is, and you're right, this is the essence of democracy. And you're putting, as some of my Tea Party friends have pointed out, you're taking our sovereignty away and handing it to an international tribunal, because by signing on to these agreements, we're basically tying our own hands.
Right. So the trade agreements actually expand investor rights, things that corporations couldn't get away with in our domestic politics. Suddenly they have a clean sheet of paper and they get to rewrite all these rules. So we take it for granted that there should be regulation in the public good. You want a permit for fracking under the St. Lawrence Seaway? Well, gee, we ought to think about that. If we want to regulate smoking or dolphin-safe tuna, we just take it for granted that it's legitimate to balance public interest with private interest. In the trade agreement, so let's start over again. And there's not going to be that balance. Corporate interests come first, and you can do whatever you want, as they say, to regulate in the public good, as long as you pay us all future profit, and anything that we lost as a result of the regulation, you have to compensate us for. Whoa, but that never would have passed a straight face test in our domestic politics, but just start with a clean sheet of paper and write it in. And then these tribunals you're talking about, they don't make decisions based on our Constitution or the Constitution of Australia or the Constitution of Canada or even the European Constitution. They make decisions based on the expanded investor rights in the trade agreement. So I think Tea Party people are justifiably alarmed. I'm justifiably alarmed. I think we should all be alarmed.
Absolutely.
Alarming.
After 20 years of NAFTA, I've yet to find someone who thinks NAFTA was a good thing. I've yet to find someone who says, yeah, it was great. It was the best thing. Everything we were promised, it came to fruition. I've yet to find that person. And yet I'm told that this agreement that we're talking about right now, giving this president fast track authority to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, this one's even worse than NAFTA is.
Here's one of the big differences. We have 19 trade agreements. NAFTA is a big one. We have one with Korea and Colombia and Panama. These next two, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, represents, by some measure, 40% of global trade. And the one with Europe is going to be another huge multi-regional deal, a multinational regional deal. So these will set the global norms. Once these deals, if these deals pass, it won't be, some issue we have with Colombia. These will be the global norms for, these will set the moral, social, political, and economic terms for globalization for a generation or two, right? This guy said 2050, that's my generation and my children's generation. If we don't like the Social Security law, we go to Congress and we change it. We change the tax laws. We change education and healthcare. That's our political process. These trade agreements will lock in these very favorable corporate rights, and it will be very difficult to step back or think, well, that's not working for us. NAFTA didn't work for us. Trade negotiators consistently to this day say how wonderful they were. It's like, are you guys looking out the window?
No, have you driven through Detroit lately?
I was. We had a little meeting in Seattle, and a trade negotiator from the UK was here, and he was asking me, what's my problem? And I said, hey, I grew up in Michigan. Have you been to Detroit lately? Literally, and or Pittsburgh. The message I had for him, and this is just so amazing. Trade negotiators really have a credibility problem and a trust problem. And in 1993, when we negotiated NAFTA, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I looked right at this trade negotiator from the UK and I said, we trusted our elected officials, our negotiators, to negotiate deals in our interest. We now have 25 years of lived experience, completely to the contrary of all those promises. You have now lost the presumption of trust. And in 1993, the burden of proof was on the skeptics. Now the burden of proof is on the negotiators. You have to actually convince us that these will be in our interest. So I'm looking at this guy, very nice man, I'm sure conscientious, well-meaning. He was not buying a word of that. And he was focused on the deal. And I believe he's negotiating in the interest of, the 1% in England, just like our negotiators are focused on the 1% in America.
Right.
And that question about, do you really have to earn our trust? I don't think he sees that as his problem.
No, it's not, because that's not who he's answerable to. And I think that's part of our problem in this country, that for so long we've allowed our elected officials to not be answerable to we the people and not hold them accountable, because politics in this country has turned almost into team sport, where, I don't care what my team does, they're still my team. Win, lose, or draw, right. Whether they make my life better or miserable, it's still my team. And we're not holding them accountable, but in my view, just based on that.
For sure. So, I think, we were in the office visit with one of our congressmen. We sort of made the case to him. He still feels enormous pressure to vote for these trade agreements. And he gave us, there were 15 of us in the room, he gave us the Franklin Roosevelt answer, make me do this, send me 20,000 emails. And I thought, well, that's kind of patronizing. But he's basically right. The elected officials recognize the real power that, corporate America has, and they're not afraid of us.
Yep. You're right. That's why I think what's going on this week is so very important, as a number of organizations have come together to have this week of action to stop fast track, which I think is so very important that we get people involved and activated and calling their representatives and the such.
Mm-hmm. They get that message. There's a hierarchy of what works. 20,000 emails, that's great. A couple of phone calls, that's much better. Phone calls from people who say, I'm your constituent and I voted for you and I won't vote for you next time. That's even more influential. And what really works, and we're past that moment, is going to a fundraiser, with my $50, or a campaign event, and confront the elected official in front of voters in the context of a campaign. And you'd be surprised how many people, actually have that opportunity to go to a campaign event or to catch the elected official face to face in front of community members. I mean, they do a lot of community meetings. That is, I think, where you break through a lot of the fog, and you're about as real to the elected official in that moment as you're ever likely to be.
No, I'm with you. And those are opportunities I've had in the past to speak to people, and you're spot on right. And the other part of it is the other way to get a hold of them is actually write them a handwritten letter.
Very
constituent, because they have something in their hand. If you want more information, stopfasttrack.com, the website, stopfasttrack.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. One of the questions I did want to ask you about, because, this isn't, I've had a couple of conversations with people who think that this is new, that this kind of opposition that I'm talking about is something new, and it's not. And I'm often surprised, and you being out in Seattle where the Battle of Seattle in '99 took place, I'm often surprised at how few people that I encounter in my life have ever heard of what went on there. And it's one of those things that's just kind of fascinating to me, because I think it was a major historical moment in this country.
Well, it was. I live in Seattle, and I was here in 1999, and I was preoccupied with my day job. I was, very confused, like I said before, about trade. Well, everybody's in favor of trade, right? Seattle, Washington, we're all about trade. And I understood, this history thing that you're talking about. I've been through enough history that I know it when I see it, but I didn't understand what this issue was. So 40,000 people in the street in Seattle is about as big a deal as you're going to get here until the Seahawks win the Super Bowl. So I knew this thing was going on. I didn't understand it. And my daughter came to me. She was in high school, and she said, is it okay if I cut class and go with my friend Janine to the demonstration? And I said to her, yeah, look, this is history. You have to go. And then I'm a father, so I said, here's $2. If you get arrested, call me. Right? This was 1999, and she didn't have a cell phone. And the third thing I told her was, listen, you stick with Janine. No boys. Every boy you add to the group lowers the collective IQ by 50%. Right? Which is old
good fatherly advice.
Listen, and I wanted, if anybody in my, was going to experience this history, it was going to be my daughter. And, when I was her age, I went to the March on Washington, to the Pentagon, and I cut class in high school. And I rode the bus home, a bus organized by the UAW, by the way. And I was very disappointed that I had not been tear gassed and other people on the bus had been tear gassed. Right? I'd missed my experience. So, I kind of know history when I see it.
Right.
My daughter did not get tear gassed. She and Janine ducked into some stores and managed not to get arrested. It's kind of amazing, when you say, what is history exactly? So at the end of this, I had to, I watched the movie Battle in Seattle later, many years later. And there's a scene at the end where the demonstrators are in jail. And they say, was it worth it, all this trouble and effort and planning and organizing? And one of them said, last week, nobody knew what the WTO was. And this week, they still don't know, but they're against it. And that's kind of the way social movements work, right? That it's experiences. You can be so intellectual and argue and have all your facts and data, but it's people's lived experiences that really, move their values and their political interests. So,
and that's why I'm hoping that this week of action will encompass some of those kind of shared experiences. I know people are going to be out going to their representatives. I know here in Pennsylvania tomorrow, they're going to have a couple of folks going to different representatives' offices and doing things every day to engage and activate people. So kind of doing on a much smaller scale what you're talking about that happened in Seattle.
Yeah, well, it all counts. You know, the environmental march in New York City. This is really the way people meet and share values and believe. This is where social movements get their energy.
Yeah, where they put down their cell phones for a minute and actually talk to the person next to them. That's the important part. But Stan, I appreciate you taking time for us and filling us in and talking to us a little bit about your experience during this week of action. Thanks so much.
Okay, talk to you later.
Alrighty, Stan Sorscher. He's a labor representative with SPEEA, also the president of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Rick Smith Show.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is Your World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, the leaders of Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. The High Court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan into South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan in 2011. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WFP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we would rely less on the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about the Star-Spangled Banner and how it evolved into America's national anthem. A young, passive, but successful lawyer, Francis Scott Key, had been called on to negotiate the release of a colonial prisoner from the British in the War of 1812. During his negotiations, he learned that the British planned to attack and destroy the city of Baltimore, which was defended by Fort McHenry. The British, of course, knew that he knew, and so they held him and 2 other colonists aboard a ship until the invasion and battle were over. His host treated him not as a prisoner, but as a respected negotiator. It was on that ship that Key wrote the words of the Star-Spangled Banner. Key said he was inspired by the huge flag that was hoisted and remained flying above Fort McHenry. Join us again for the song's popularity. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Sounds like something I would do with my kids, because I'm sure my kids will come, Dad, can I cut class to go to this thing? And look, I'm one who, like Stan, if it's something that I think is going to be historical, jump right in. Get out there, be involved, get out there and experience. Like I said, I've said a million times, I'm an experiential learner. It's all about what's going on, and all of that, and that's pretty funny. Here's 50 cents. Call me if you get arrested. Just funny stuff. But you go back and you look at these agreements, and look, I don't think anyone's against the idea of trade per se. I'm certainly not. But I think you have to talk about these issues in a way that understand. If we continue the same kind of policy arrangements that we've had with NAFTA, and it's interesting to me because we've always, and I love this. Rick, we live in an era of globalization. We've always lived in a global economy. Understand the whole Boston Tea Party thing. That was not as much about the tax, in my view, as it was corporate dominance of the tea and the tax code and and all of that. But you look at this, and as we're not being told what's in it, because I don't know anyone knows for certain everything that's in it, because I haven't been able to talk to one of the 600 trade advisors whom I don't think we even know who they are, to be honest. But for me, I look at this stuff, and we were sold. It's been 20 years since NAFTA was passed, and we were sold a bill of goods. This was going to create jobs here. It was going to lift all boats throughout the whole region in the North American Accord, as Reagan called it. And what's actually happened is we've lost well over 1 million jobs just because of NAFTA. And when you look at the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, where you've got over 850,000 people who have been certified, having lost their job because of these trade agreements, there's a problem. So then, given this, why would you continue to negotiate the same kind of agreements? Unless you have, and this is where the radical right wingers go, oh, you're talking about, global governments and all this stuff, which, you could easily fall into believing, there's going to be one world order and it's going to be the corporate order. But you don't hear that. It's always one world evil government. It's not these corporate entities and these corporate titans who all it is about is more profit. And for me, I guess I've never been in that world. But at the end of the day, as you continue to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, eventually what do you have for society? And you look at these massive trade deficits that we have with the rest of the world. Now you're opening up another region of the world that I would think you're going to have even more trade deficits with. And this guys that somehow we're going to increase our trade, because today I guess the big news was we've now come to some kind of a technological agreement with the Chinese that they say is going to open up $1 trillion worth of trade between the U.S. and China, allowing us access to their market. I got to wonder, because, we're the only ones dumb enough to negotiate from hey, how can we open things up for our companies without saying, how do we open up things to better life for our workers and for our citizens? So I've got to wonder how much of this is actually going to benefit us. You kind of have to wonder. But if you look at the North American Free Trade Agreement, you look at NAFTA, exports have increased. The problem is imports have far exceeded the exports. What we've actually done is we've had some increase in, because, we're exporting a little bit more, but the stuff coming in is much more. So what you end up with is obviously this deficit. And what happens then? Well, you lose jobs. But Rick, you got those export jobs, and we got warehouse jobs. People moving boxes from one place to another. Those are not manufacturing jobs. Those are not creative jobs. Those are not value-added jobs. Those are the, hey, we've got to figure out how to streamline this and squeeze it down to as little as we can, which means lower wages and no benefits and no retirement. And what was interesting, what Stan said is, these trade agreements are going to dictate how we live in 2050. That's how far down the road they're looking. And the question is do you want to live in that world where you now have this tribunal that isn't your local government? And I know everyone's, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, everyone's thrilled to death about the president coming out for net neutrality. What does it mean when we pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade or any of these trade agreements? What is that going to mean then? Does it matter then? Does what the FCC have to say matter? I don't know. And we're going to find out a little bit more about that. Anyway, as I talked about the other day, the Supreme Court, they're going to hear the case on Obamacare, which is, we've talked about this a couple of times over the past several months. Basically just a typo. They didn't, in a 2,800 page or how many thousands of pages it is, there's always something in there, a little typo. This is basically what, as I understand the challenges, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, they're saying that the rates for Obamacare are coming out. We'll find out kind of what that is. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It is believed that a little hard work is good for the soul. If this is true, then the history of child workers in the United States is a soulful tale. The first child laborers landed in Virginia in the year 1619. These immigrant children found slave working conditions and poverty wages in their new world. As the years passed, little changed. The average child worker toiled 16 to 18 hours per day, 6 days a week in factories and textile mills. Education was a luxury, and many believed a loss on working children. Charles Harding, president of the Merchants Woolen Company, stated, "There is such a thing as too much education for working people sometimes. I have seen cases where young people are spoiled for labor by too much refinement." Labor unions, consumer groups, and parent coalitions all work to shorten hours, ease conditions, and ultimately end exploitive child abuses. Baby strikes in Paterson, New Jersey, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, demanding 11 and 12-hour workdays were fought vehemently by mill and factory owners. The Pennsylvania legislature was the first to consider prohibiting child workers in 1833, and consider is all Pennsylvania did until July of 1903, when Mother Jones led the March of the Mill Children from Philadelphia to Oyster Bay, New York, in an attempt to influence President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1836, Massachusetts was the first state to pass a law restricting the use of children in manufacturing. And 102 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Walsh-Healy Act restricting the use of child labor is constitutional. Also in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which put more stringent restrictions on the use of child labor. While hard work teaches discipline, self-reliance, and responsibility, the exploitive nature of our past must remind us that what we have today we mustn't take for granted, for the days of tomorrow are doomed to repeat if we ignore those lessons hard learned. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Come on, you good workers, good news to you I'll tell about the good old union that's coming here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So I guess the healthcare.gov website has updated the 2015 plans and prices. So you can go to healthcare.gov and check out the end of the world, as I'm told. The prices are going to go 1,000,000% increase. Healthcare will be unaffordable, and it'll just be the end of the world. At least that's what I've been led to believe. I don't know that that's true, but we will find out. That's why I've asked Antoinette Kraus. She's the director of the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. Antoinette, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, so it's great to be on, Rick.
So the end of the world, huh? The prices had to have gone through the roof like 1,000%, right?
Well, actually, what we're seeing in Pennsylvania, that is in most places, the maximum rate increase is about 8%, and we're seeing a lot more competition. And to put that in perspective, we've seen double-digit rate increases in the individual and small group market year after year in Pennsylvania.
So could you make the argument that this is actually maybe controlling some of those costs?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that increased competition and getting more folks covered is driving down the price for everyone.
Now, in the single and individual markets, didn't they just throw all those people off of that? I mean, it wasn't at the end of it. Didn't Obama kick all those people off?
No, I mean, actually, it protected them so they can finally, a lot of them can get health plans because a lot of folks had pre-existing conditions. And when you're trying to get a health plan on your own, it's often unaffordable if you could even get coverage before. So folks are getting covered. They're getting tax credits to help make it affordable. And we're very excited to be going into open enrollment this Saturday.
Let me ask you this. I mean, we heard an awful lot about the single and the individual markets because there were people who evidently lost their plans or they were no longer being offered. Explain that.
Yeah, some folks did lose their plans because they didn't meet certain standards or they were high deductible. So they didn't always cover things like preventative care, maternity care, mental health services. So what the Affordable Care Act said is that plans have to offer a standard of benefits and they have to meet a certain quality and value or they couldn't exist anymore.
Well, what if I wanted the crappy health insurance I had before and paying extreme rates for them? What if I wanted to keep that plan? I was told I could.
Well, I think there's just been a lot of misinformation about that. Most folks have gotten a better plan. And, there's still high deductible catastrophic plans out there for folks that want to spend less money on coverage.
No, there you go. So I understand the open enrollment period is up. You say the increases haven't been as dramatic. Walk me through how folks go through this. If you still aren't covered, or if you maybe want to check out other plans, walk me through how you go through this.
Yeah, so folks can go window shopping on healthcare.gov. So if you go to healthcare.gov, you put in your zip code. It'll ask you a couple of questions about your income and your age, and then it will pull up plans in your area, what those are, how much they'll cost, and it'll also tell you if you're eligible for financial assistance. So you can look at those plans up until Saturday, and then Saturday you can start the enrollment process.
And then what if you don't do that by Saturday?
Open enrollment goes until February 15th. If you want coverage by January 1st, you need to enroll by December 15th.
Oh, okay. So, let's say I decide I'm going to go do this. I've been paying attention to the Supreme Court. They've taken on this latest attack on the healthcare law. Let's say I get into this and the Supreme Court says no more subsidies and throws the whole thing out. Do I lose? Am I going to end up losing my healthcare?
So I think what's important for folks to note is that the Supreme Court is not going to hear this case until next year. So folks should enroll. They're not going to lose their healthcare coverage in the short term. And I think the important thing to note is if you're getting a tax credit and the Supreme Court rules against the subsidies, you're not going to have to pay those back. So folks should definitely enroll, get the financial assistance, and continue on through the process.
So what are you hearing about this, the Supreme Court taking this on? As I've talked about it with people over the past several months, basically, as I understand it, was just like a typo in the law where they didn't include it in a certain couple other sections, but they included the line in other sections that said that, the federal government could fund these subsidies, and it wasn't only the states. I'm curious what you're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, we're really having this debate over one word that's in the law that would give states with federally facilitated marketplaces the authority to give tax credits. So, we've seen a lot of lower courts rule on this. A lot of them have ruled that states that operate a federal exchange can offer tax credits. So, we're fairly confident that when the Supreme Court rules, they're not going to strike down health insurance for millions of Americans that are receiving tax credit.
So you don't think they're going to throw the whole system into chaos and leave, about 8 million new people who've gotten health care over the last that didn't have it before?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't predict the future. I think what we want to emphasize to folks now is that it's in no way going to affect your tax credits this year. If the Supreme Court does decide to throw out the tax subsidies, consumers are not going to be required to pay back those tax credits. So it should no way impact your decision to go and enroll in healthcare coverage this year.
Yeah, because I look at all of these attacks, and I'm expecting now that the Republicans have taken over the Senate, I'm expecting another vote on repealing Obamacare, or repealing the Affordable Care Act. It just seems like it's constant chaos around this, and to me, I think it sends a signal of instability that I think might scare people.
Yeah, and it causes a lot of confusion. We run a statewide helpline, so every time there's another vote to repeal Obamacare, we get a flood of calls that people think that the law has been repealed and they're going to lose their health insurance. So, it's really throwing the system into chaos, and it's really political, partisan politics getting in the way of folks getting health care coverage.
And this is private health. This isn't the government takeover of healthcare. These are private companies, right? Because there's not a public option here.
No, there's no public option. I mean, we're subsidizing private health insurance companies. So when you go to the marketplace, you're picking between Blue Cross and Aetna and Cigna, private health insurance plans.
And as you were talking to me earlier before we went on, you said out in Western Pennsylvania that now that they've expanded the number of choices people have as well.
Yeah, so Western Pennsylvania, we've seen an expansion in plans. We've actually seen that all across the state. And what's happened with increased competition, we've seen a number of cheaper plans enter the market to compete with plans that were more expensive last year.
Now, even those cheaper plans have some bare minimum of coverage. I mean, it's not going to be one of these mini plans that we used to see at the fast food joints that covered basically nothing other than, maybe gave you a card that to at least make you feel like you had some coverage.
Yeah, no, not at all. Every plan that's in the marketplace has to meet quality standards, and they all have to cover 10 essential health benefits. So they have to cover preventative care, maternity care, prescription drugs, mental health. So it's a full comprehensive benefit package.
So that's a good thing, I think. And as we move towards the, like you said, this window shopping period, the full enrollment period, are we expecting an increase of folks who maybe weren't able to sign up last time? Or are we expecting a significant increase this time around?
I mean, I think it's hard to tell. I mean, I think a lot of folks that really needed health insurance got health insurance. The folks that are remaining, we saw polling last week that said that 60% of the remaining uninsured have no idea that Obamacare even exists. So I think this
How
time
is that
around,
possible? How is that
I don't
possible?
know. That's what I say. We spend all day talking about this. I feel like who can be left that doesn't know about it? But yeah, there's a lot of people that still don't know. So I think this time around, we're going to really have to redouble our efforts to reach some very vulnerable populations that have just been left out of the process.
Now, I have no idea how you don't know that that's the law. With all of the vitriol and all of the hatred and all, we got to repeal. I don't know how you can miss that it's the law of the land.
Yep, I don't know, but it's happening. So we're always happy to be on shows like this. And, we're out doing one-on-one enrollment assistance, and we're doing public events to continue to spread the word.
And where would we go to get help?
So you can go to our website, pahealthaccess.org/get help. Also, we have a statewide helpline, and the number is 877-570-3642. Again, 877-570-3642. And we have enrollment assisters in every part of the state that are helping folks enroll. They'll sit down with you one-on-one or answer your questions over the phone. just to help make that process that much more simple.
And we'll make sure we got links over at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Antoinette Kraus's name. It'll take you right there. And because, one of the things that bothers me is, and I've had the opportunity to meet a number of people who have benefited from this law. As I'm sure you've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of stories. I can't imagine, this being taken away from people now. I mean, I've talked to people who literally say it saved their lives.
Yeah, and I'll never forget the first person I enrolled in health insurance. She hadn't been able to go to the doctor for 6 months. She had really horrible fibroids, was in serious pain because they weren't cancer. They couldn't remove them. And we were able to enroll her in health insurance. She got a plan for like 20 cents a month, which I couldn't believe. And she was able to get it taken care of. But by the end of that session, she was just in tears because she didn't know what to do and she just couldn't get health insurance before Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, in this country, that's an absolute shame, and it's not, I think, what we as a nation should stand for.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And we're glad that Obamacare is moving forward. We're also glad that this year folks will be able to get Medicaid coverage if they were shut out last year because our governor had not taken advantage of Medicaid expansion. Which just, again, made me just shake my head and go, exactly why haven't we done this? And the hope is that the new governor, when Tom Wolf takes office, he makes it even better. Yeah, and I mean, we're pushing every day for Governor-elect Wolf to undo the really problematic health policies that were created under the Corbett administration. Yeah, I've got a lot of hopes for Governor-elect Tom Wolf, and I'm hoping that we can help push some of that stuff in the right direction. But as you've said, the open enrollment period begins when again? It begins November 15th, this Saturday, and it goes through February 15th. For folks that are eligible for Medicaid, so if your income is below about $15,000, you can enroll at any time during the year. There you go. In Pennsylvania, PAHealthAccess.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Antoinette, I appreciate you taking time for us. Always great to have you on the program. Yep, always great to be here. Thanks, Rick. Thanks so much, Antoinette Kraus, Director of the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. Again, it's PAHealthAccess.org, the website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
You'll just have to leave. Unemployment runs out after just 6 weeks. How does it feel to be a budget cut? You're snipped. You no longer exist. And I was deferred for us a little cure. So we can read the facts and see a little run. See our chart, unemployment's going down. Everyone's your life, it's our problem. Keep it going.
A big surprise in this year's elections is that American politics has become dominated by the least likely of participants, shy people. That's strange, since running for office is an ego game, attracting those at ease with self-promotion. But the hot new trend is to campaign anonymously, not even whispering your name to voters. Of course, these are not the campaigns of actual candidates, nor are the campaigners even people. Rather, they are corporations, empowered by the Frankensteins on our Supreme Court to possess the political rights of us real human-type people. Using their shareholders' money, corporate entities are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to elect or defeat whomever they choose. You would know these corporations, for they are major brand names from big oil, big food, big pharma, etc. Normally, they're not at all bashful about promoting their corporate brands, but shh, they want to be totally secretive about their massive spending to decide who holds office in America. They realize that their self-serving campaigns would alienate their customers, employees, and shareholders, so they're keeping their involvement hush-hush. One agency could compel them to reveal their spending on what amounts to a corporate coup of our democratic elections, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC is supposed to guard the right of investors to know how corporate executives are spending their money. But this watchdog isn't barking, much less biting, thus allowing CEOs to take unlimited amounts of other people's money without their permission and secretly pour it down the darkest hole in American politics. This is Jim Hightower saying, SEC's inaction is gutless, making it complicit in the corporate corruption of our governing system. To help make it do its duty, link up with Public Citizen at www.citizen.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13. Would you dive for...
The bar's still open, but man, it's slow. The tip jar's light and the register's low. The bartender don't have much to say. The regular crowd gets thinner each day. Some have maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and living in cars. Minimum wage won't pay for a roof, won't pay for a drink. If you gotta have proof, just try it yourself, Mr. CEO. See how far $5.15 an hour will go. Take a part-time job at one of your stores. I bet you can't make it here anymore.
So tomorrow's the big day here in Pennsylvania, anyway, to see which direction the Republican-led Senate is going to head. Look, we know where the House is going to go. We know the House is taking the deep end drift. If you understand what I'm saying, they're already, in my view, off to the extreme right. Anyway, the Senate has always been the place of sanity, while right of center, not extremely right of center. So when I get these emails from these crazy groups like the Citizens Alliance of Pennsylvania, which again, could you get any less creative, really? To go back, harken back to the old days of the corporate dominated groups who were union busters and use the exact same name. Come on, little creativity out there. Anyway, they sent out an email today, just gushing with joy and all that Scott Wagner has opened the floodgates, as they said, to open criticism of the current Senate Majority Leader Dominic Pileggi. They now are thrilled that a number of other state senators have gone, yeah, we should be doing crazy stuff like other states. Other states are laughing at us. Because we're not crazy yet, and I fear as I read through their email, they point to actually getting things done as a bad thing. Like investing in education, and doing some things that need to get done, so that taxpayers go, our government's actually working. To me, this email, along with a number of other groups who are influential in pushing these people because they fund them heavily, this sends the signal to me that things are going to get really interesting here in the Commonwealth for the next 2 years, until there's another election. But even at that, because I'm sitting back and I'm still digesting what happened last Tuesday. And I'm still going through and going, the Republicans ran on nothing. They ran on no agenda whatsoever. They ran on hate and attacks. They ran on fear and smear. And look, the economy has not picked up the way that people would like. And I understand that. But when you don't run on any agenda other than those guys are horrible and don't vote for the guy who likes the black guy in the White House, you end up in an interesting situation, because here we are. And I find this interesting. Here we are in this situation where now you've got a party in control of not just the state House and the state Senate, but also on the national level, the state House and the national House and the national Senate. And no agenda. No way, nothing other than the same old failed ideology. We're supposed to go along like it's 1985 again. Like, the same tax cut mentality. That's what's going to happen. We're going to be able to work on this. It's one of those situations where There's not a lot that can be done because, the same failed ideology is what it is. I mean, think about that for a second. It's the exact same failed plans that got us into the mess we're in right now. Tax cuts for the very wealthy, more handouts for the few, in the hopes that maybe possibly they'll create jobs. It hasn't happened. It didn't happen in the 80s. It didn't happen in the 90s. It didn't happen in the 2000s. It's certainly not happening now. It just doesn't work. But it's the same failed ideology that they keep pushing towards us. That's their agenda. That they're not changing. We're going to stick to it, even if we're heading it reminds me of a guy that, and this is one of those funny, kind of weird stories. It reminds me of the guy who, when I was driving for a trucking company at the time, and we used to go, from northeastern Pennsylvania up to New Haven, Connecticut. And he's heading out towards New Haven. I think New Haven was 165 miles away. So, he's driving down the road, and, he gets to about 200 miles, and he goes, I think I missed it. So he calls in and he goes, I think I'm lost. And they go, where are you? And he goes, I'm near Albany. And they go, Albany? What are you doing near Albany? He goes, well, I missed him. He goes, you're right. You missed the turn. You got to go all the way back into New York and New Jersey because you've gone completely the wrong way. He gets back in the truck. He continues down the road. About 200 miles later, he calls back again, goes, I'm just not seeing New Jersey. Where are you? He goes, well, I'm in Plattsburgh. Plattsburgh? You continued going the wrong way again. What's wrong with you? So he gets in the truck, and they tell him how to get back, and then he gets back in the truck, and he keeps going. About an hour later, he calls again. He goes, I'm at the Canadian border. They won't let me through. And they're like, what are you doing at the Canadian border? Well, this is the way you told me to go. No, it's not. We told you to go the other way. And when I asked him why why it took him so long to call in and he said, well, I was making good time. There was so much traffic the other way. I was just making good time. And it made me think that, that's such a simplistic mentality that must be what our legislators think. Well, this is the easy course. This is what we've always done. We're making good time. Even though every time you do it, it fails. And, I'm again looking at these free trade agreements. I'm looking at more tax cuts, and I actually fear that the Republicans are going to push for it and that Obama will sign it. And we're going to end up in one of these situations in 20 years, looking back, going, you know what? We lost another couple million jobs. I mean, I'm really struck that as a nation we haven't, on really a visceral level, turned back against these insane trade agreements, simply because they haven't worked for us. When you look at since 2001, because of NAFTA, we've lost 56,000 factories of 500 workers or more. There's something wrong with that. When you look at stagnating wages and declining wages, and not just here, but in Mexico as well. In Mexico, someone making minimum wage today, that wage is about 38% lower than it was before NAFTA. You could buy about 38% more before NAFTA. Because their economy, and you wonder why we now see drug cartels. You wonder why we see mass immigration attempts into this country. Because hey, we're not making it here. And you look at the immigration thing, which is huge. If you can't make a living there, and look, Canada, hope that the U.S. doesn't have an immigration flood to Canada because of the number of jobs we could possibly lose over this. And they're losing them as well. I mean, that's the other part of this. But you look at the numbers and you look at all of the people who have come to this country just looking for work. Because you don't think people just said, you know what, I think we're gonna walk across the desert and maybe we die and maybe we don't. Because what? Does it make any sense to anyone? And the answer to me is no. Doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Because I've often put myself in that position. You know, what if I'm standing on that southern side of the border? I lost my livelihood in the fields because of agribusiness here in the U.S. There are no jobs. There's no opportunity anywhere where I live. So I head north because, hey, head north, son. That's where the jobs are. They're at the maquiladoras. And I find that there aren't any jobs there. How much does it take for me to just go, well, I might as well keep going? And then you find someone who says, you know what, I can get you a job, working at a slaughterhouse or a fish processing plant in Massachusetts or a tire place in York, Pennsylvania, or who knows where. I can get you a job. All you got to do is make it there. And then you put yourself into these exploitable situations where you're screwed. And then you've got a nation that pulls the nonsense that we've been doing. And what's it all come back to? It's back, in my view, to our trade agreements. Quick break.
The cardboard sign sitting there by the left turn line, a flag on his wheelchair flapping in the breeze, one leg missing and both hands free. No one's paying much mind to him. The VA budget's just stretched so thin, and there's more coming back from the Mideast war. We can't make it here anymore.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A community coalition called Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management says Detroit's bankruptcy under an emergency manager appointed by the governor was done on the backs of Detroit workers and its largely impoverished African-American population. City assets were sold off to private corporations. Coalition spokesperson Fred Vitale says workers had their pensions and health care cut and even had money they had put into retirement annuity accounts from their own wages clawed back to go towards city debt.
The bankruptcy and the payment of debt is being done on the backs of Detroit workers and retirees and the overwhelmingly poor African-American residents of the city. The alternative is the restoration of state revenue cuts and a very serious effort to reclaim the money that the banks have drained from the city through predatory lending and foreclosure.
Vitale says a people's plan proposed by the coalition would have resolved Detroit's financial issues while protecting workers. Vitale says workers didn't cause Detroit's financial problems and should not have their pension money taken.
Those problems were caused, in our opinion, by structural racism, redlining, things like that took place in the past, plans of fiscal austerity that have extended for over 30 years, and enormous job losses. Those are the root causes of the financial problems of Detroit.
FCC Chair Tom Wheeler was greeted by protesters carrying a Save the Internet banner at his home Monday. The popularresistance.org protesters support net neutrality or internet equality. Wheeler's FCC is considering changes that could lead to internet speed tiers favoring large corporations over people. President Obama Monday called on the FCC to defend net neutrality.
The idea of net neutrality has unleashed the power of the internet and given innovators the chance to thrive. Abandoning these principles would threaten to end the internet as we know it. And that's why I'm urging the Federal Communications Commission to do everything they can to protect net neutrality for everyone.
Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance, says that all people must have equal access to internet content without discrimination. She says wealthy corporations should not get faster internet delivery service than startups and citizens groups.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement.
Now it's time to clear the way for a series of trade agreements.
You can trust me.
From the Monongahela Valley to the Mesabi Iron Range, to the coal mines of Appalachia, the story's always the same. 700 tons of metal a day. Now, sir, you tell me the world's changed. Once I made you rich enough to forget my name. In Youngstown.
That line always sends shivers down my spine. That I've made you rich enough to forget my name, and that kind of seems what's going on, especially when you look at our trade policies. As this isn't, in my view, about trade. It's not about us trading rice for beans or widgets for whatnots or any of that. It's about deciding who gets what, and definitely not us getting any of it. That's what it seems to me. And yesterday, the president said, one country's prosperity doesn't have to come at the expense of another. If we work together and act together, strengthening the economic ties will benefit all nations. And I wonder, and there's part of me wonder if he actually believes that, or if that's what he has to say. Because in any competition, you have winners and losers. And when you're negotiating these kind of things, it seems like working people, it doesn't matter where, they seem to be the losers. Anyway, here to talk to us about the week of action that is in stopping fast track, I've asked Mike Doyle. He is the legislative representative for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Mike, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So I look at this week of action, and I know that this has been an issue I've been talking about for a couple of years now. It looks like now we're coming to a head where there's actually a possibility that this may come to fruition via fast track.
Well, I am not predicting that it's going to happen during the lame duck session. So between now and the end of the year, we're mobilizing because, of course, in this kind of organizing, you plan for the worst but hope for the best.
Right.
Prepare for, and that's what we're doing with the week of action that you mentioned a minute ago. Is taking the message out here in the field and taking it to the Congress members who are still part of the 113th Congress. But really, I have to say the challenge is getting ready for next spring and the beginning of the 114th Congress, which, as you and your listeners know, has a different composition than the current Congress, and it presents some new challenges.
Yeah, I kept asking, during the campaign, why is this not an issue? Because my fear had been, and structurally, it looked like the potential was there for the Republicans to take the Senate. I didn't predict that it would be as big as they did, but I thought they would. And I worried, mused months ago, that one of the key issues that bothered me was this one, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement and Fast Track Authority. And I didn't hear anybody else really talking about it during the election cycle.
Well, part of the reason for that, and I'll just give you kind of my inside scoop on all this, frankly, because the Senate is, more corporatist and the House is more populist, the House of Representatives, there's 435 of them there, and in the Senate there's 100. And we were never going to win this fight in the United States Senate. Now, Harry Reid was a big friend of the fair trade movement and refused to move fast-track trade negotiating authority during this last session. Ever since the State of the Union address last January, Harry Reid has been our biggest ally, and he said, "I'm not moving that bill." He's the Democrat. He was the majority leader of the Senate, so he's gone. And with him gone, and Mitch McConnell wanting to do the bidding of the Chamber of Commerce on this issue, we expect that we will see a fast track move for fast track sometime in the new year, in the new Congress. We will lose the fight in the Senate, and we probably always would have lost the fight in the Senate once Harry Reid agreed, under pressure from the White House, to schedule a vote. No, Rick, the vote was always going to be in the House of Representatives. And the reason is, and when I say the fight, I mean a fight that we can win. And the reason we can win it in the House of Representatives is that there are, as I suggested a second ago, populists and corporatists in both parties,
right?
Both the Republicans and the Democrats. And what we need to do now, getting ready for the next Congress, getting ready for the fight in the spring, is to persuade the populists, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, to hold firm against the grant of fast-track trade negotiating authority for this president and his United States Trade Representative to expand the flawed and failed NAFTA model through the TPP.
And the thing that I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm going, but shouldn't we as citizens already viscerally know that this NAFTA model is a failure? I mean, I'm struggling with the fact that we're even considering it, given the last 20 years of job losses. I'm struggling. Look, I understand there are populists on both sides, and I've been saying this is a chance to bring the Tea Party and the far left together, and maybe to fight this off. But viscerally, for every voter in this country, NAFTA has been an abysmal failure for working people.
Yeah, and it's that sort of cliched, hackneyed definition of insanity, repeating the same activity over and over and expecting a different outcome. You're absolutely right. The historical record is clear. Since the NAFTA, and if you include the WTO and all the trade agreements in the NAFTA model that have passed, the CAFTA, for example, some of the other bilateral agreements like the Korea agreement. I mean, the result has been through outsourcing of jobs and through import surges under these trade agreements, somewhere in the vicinity of 5 million American jobs lost. And I'm not just talking about any old jobs. I'm talking about good middle-class jobs, industrial jobs, textile and apparel, auto workers, machinists, teamsters. The labor movement has suffered because of the offshoring and because of the import surges. I agree with you. I don't think it takes, it doesn't take rockets. This is not rocket surgery. This is obviously a trend historically under globalization, corporate globalization, that has, eliminated so many jobs in the United States. And so now we've got this president and his USTR, which he was saying the other day, he's working off a talking point created by the USTR. And I felt that he knew better. But we worked really hard for this guy twice. Twice we worked really hard to get this guy elected. And it's a little disappointing that he's now mouthing the talking points of the Chamber of Commerce and his own USTR.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you, because, I think average everyday working people get it. These agreements are not about us. They're not about workers. They're about corporations. They're about patent laws. They're about ensuring the wealth of the 1/10 of 1/10 of 1%, if you will. And it's not about the rest of us. And, like you said, I worked to get the president elected. I voted for him twice, and I support, many of his policies. This one, for me, just flawed from the beginning. And, my question for him, if I could ask him, is I sat 20 feet from him when he said, I'm not going to sign the free trade agreements unless there are strong environmental and labor policies, and wasn't going to sign Colombia or Chorus or Panama or any of those, but he did. And now we're basically hearing, he's somehow somebody slipped him the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and it's really disappointing, especially as to the TPP, because the TPP is a really big honker agreement. And it's Japan and Australia and New Zealand and Chile and Peru, Mexico, Canada, Japan, Singapore. Who am I leaving out? Brunei, the Sultanate of Brunei. It's really a big agreement. And this is really important for you and your listeners to understand. This is the last time we're going to have this debate. Right. The TPP is what's called a docking agreement. And what that means is that any time a country wants to get into a free trade deal with the United States, which many, many countries do, right, to get those lower tariffs, to get their access to the U.S. consumer markets
Right.
for their cheap-made goods. Anytime any other country from now on, if the TPP passes, all they do is they join the TPP. They add on, and the TPP goes from 12 to 13, Taiwan, 14, Korea, 15, the Philippines, and on and on and on. These countries waiting in the wings. So this is the last time we're going to have the debate, the national conversation. It is
are we
last
having
chance to fix the model.
Are we having a debate on this? Did I miss something? Because I didn't think we were. I didn't actually get to know what was in it. I'm not one of the quote unquote trade advisors, or I mean
Right.
corporate lobbyists.
Right.
We're having a debate on this. I didn't think. I thought this was about shoving this down my throat. Because isn't that what Fast Track's going to do?
Well, I'll say a couple things. First, it's being negotiated in almost absolute secrecy. So it's hard to know what's in it. And if it weren't for WikiLeaks and for some of the ways we've been able to look over the shoulders of the negotiators, guys like me who track this stuff, we wouldn't know anything. And the Obama administration has disappointed us in this movement for this reason, especially. When George Bush was trying to expand NAFTA throughout the hemisphere on a thing called the FTAA, he would release the text. We knew what was in it.
Right.
So that's part of the problem. The second part is, as you say, Fast Track. Now, Fast Track, for your listeners who don't know, is I like to call it a legislative laxative that's bad for the Constitution. It's a double entendre there.
There you go. I'll let you have that one.
Thank you. It's a closed rule. And when they bring these trade agreements back into the Congress, up or down vote, limited debate, no amendments, right? And the administration gets to write the implementing legislation. The Congress, which constitutionally has, under Article 1, Section 8, the exclusive authority to create our trade policy, is completely shut out of the process. And we think that's wrong, especially for an agreement as big and as complicated as this, right? It's a docking agreement, and because of all the job losses that we've had on all these agreements before now, all the other NAFTA expansions, we think Fast Track is a completely inappropriate way to approach the future of our trade policy and trade policy reform.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the mindset, shouldn't we be fixing what was wrong with NAFTA first before we go making another one? And if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as candidate Obama, there was actually talk of maybe even possibly pulling out of NAFTA.
Right. And he's saying renegotiate the bad parts of NAFTA. He said he didn't want to have a fast track that wasn't, it didn't involve, Congress. He said as a candidate many of the right things. And that's why, and it's not just on trade. I mean, there have been other issues too. We know this, but we really kind of were hoping that this was the change we were waiting for in trade policy. And it breaks my heart, being a long-time labor organizer, worked my butt off for that guy twice. It breaks my heart that he's now just mouthing the Chamber of Commerce talking points on trade expansion with this secret deal that's going to cost us more jobs, plus all the problems that you mentioned a minute ago, Rick, around the environment, the consumer stuff. It's just seems like it's just a real
kick in the pants. It is what it is.
Yeah,
and because I look at what he said yesterday about net neutrality. And, that's all fine, well, and good. Let's say the FCC does that. It's all wonderful and all great. But now, as I understand, and you're the expert on this, wouldn't being part of this Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, wouldn't this overstep our ability to regulate that and basically render net neutrality worthless?
Yeah, that's a big part of the problem. And also on the data privacy. On the intellectual property and on the data privacy, the big corporations are exerting their agenda in the TPP. So on the one hand, he's saying the right things on a domestic front, but what I'm not even sure he understands this is that he's getting us into trade agreements where the big corporations, those who are opposed to net neutrality, who are looking for their comparative advantage in the data world, are going to sort of like affect our regulatory regime on that through the side door using a trade agreement. And that's why they're doing it. I mean, it's pretty explicit strategy on their part.
Yeah.
Right?
I would argue the back door, but okay.
Well, they're definitely not coming through the front door as a policy matter. And for those of us who like democracy and like the exchange of ideas and the debate around decisions and what our future is in the global economy, would really prefer that this debate that you and I wish we were having more of was more in the public, that the TPP text was released, that it should be out in the public, and the scrutiny and the press. We should all be able to look at it now, and that this is not the way to do a trade policy.
I'm right there with you.
Right?
I'm right there with you. And, I look at this and the reality is we've got to act now because the guy who said he was going to be one of the most transparent president in history doing something that I would argue is the antithesis of transparency. We need to be pushing to make sure that this just doesn't go through and we actually have a say in it. So that's the week of action. StopFastTrack.com, the website. What other things could people do to get involved? What are you guys suggesting, Mike?
So there's for your listeners who tweet, there's a lot of tweeting going on, a lot of Twitter storms. There's a lot of, talk radio, letters to the editor, op-eds, the kind of standard stuff that are important, to keep the conversation going our way. But most of all, I guess what I'd say is this. The Congress is coming back tomorrow. Right? They're for the lame duck session. Now is a really great time for everybody to contact their Congress critters, whether they're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter, and make it very, very clear that we will not stand for a fast track bill during the lame duck. If they want to have the debate, we'll have it in the 114th Congress. We'll have it next spring, and that we oppose fast track. And to make that message clear to the House of Representatives, that's where like I said at the beginning of this conversation, that's where the battle is going to be joined. That's where it's win or lose, and I'm hoping we're going to win it.
I'm right there with you because at the end of it, if we lose, it's in my view a lower standard of living and a much harder struggle for my kids.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rick.
Mike, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
It's my pleasure, as always. Stay tuned.
All righty. Mike Dolan, legislative representative for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. For most of this year, the leaders of Catalonia, in Spain's northeast, had been eyeing this past Sunday with excitement. The plan was to hold a binding referendum that would allow the province to pursue independence from Spain. The High Court ruled in September that a binding referendum would be illegal, so Catalonian leaders pursued a non-binding referendum, which was held yesterday. And the results were clear. Of 2 million ballots cast, 81% were in favor of independence. Catalan leader Artur Mas says he'll keep pushing for a binding vote, but Madrid's opposition shows no signs of softening. A convoy of food assistance for close to 50,000 people has crossed from Sudan to South Sudan. The number of deliveries will increase in the weeks ahead, but it's the route that matters. Since the crisis in South Sudan began last December, aid has only flowed over land from Ethiopia and Uganda. The last time Sudan authorized similar deliveries was before South Sudan declared independence from Sudan. George Famian is a spokesperson with the World Food Program in Juba.
The fact that WFP worked with both the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan on this is something which is very much appreciated from the WSP side and from the UN as a whole.
In addition to marking political progress between the two countries, land deliveries are a big money saver, costing between 6 and 7 times less than the airdrops the World Food Program so regularly depends on.
The advantage of moving food to Sudan into South Sudan is that it is faster, but it also means that we would rely less on the costly air operations.
Across South Sudan, an estimated 1.5 million people are believed to be facing emergency-level food insecurity. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about the Star-Spangled Banner and how it evolved into America's national anthem. A young, passive, but successful lawyer, Francis Scott Key, had been called on to negotiate the release of a colonial prisoner from the British in the War of 1812. During his negotiations, he learned that the British planned to attack and destroy the city of Baltimore, which was defended by Fort McHenry. The British, of course, knew that he knew, and so they held him and 2 other colonists aboard a ship until the invasion and battle were over. His host treated him not as a prisoner, but as a respected negotiator. It was on that ship that Key wrote the words of the Star-Spangled Banner. Key said he was inspired by the huge flag that was hoisted and remained flying above Fort McHenry. Join us again for the song's popularity. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome to the new dark ages. Yeah, I hope you're living right. These are the new dark ages. And the world might end tonight.
John sent me an email during the break. It's one of these things, again, you look back and you think about, the last 20 years, you think of all of this NAFTA, and John points out that we were promised hundreds of thousands of jobs. We were promised prosperity across borders. We were promised a rising economy for all in North America. We were promised a better life, and what we were given is misery. And John, you're right. I mean, for a lot of working people, life has gotten much worse. And for me, it's kind of depressing about all this is I really voted for, and I've said this before, Obama was the first president that I voted for in 2008. He hit all of the right points. He hit all of the important issues that I thought were important, and then not so much. He gets elected, and again, I've said, I don't know. You don't know what happens when you get into that room where they go, okay, the campaign's over. Here's reality. And you sit across the table from all of these CEOs and these corporate titans who for generations have been given everything that they could possibly want. And we have given them enormous power over our economy, whether it goes or whether it crashes. So, I tend to a little bit give him the benefit of the doubt because I still want to believe, and maybe it's just my wanting to believe that he is that guy that ran in 2008, and that this is just a moment where maybe it is we don't know what it is we don't know yet. But I look at this. This is kind of like that moment where you go. I can make an argument for the Obamacare the way it is. It should have had at least a public option. You can make an argument, a very, very small, minor, almost non-existent argument on why the Employee Free Choice Act didn't come up. But you start putting all of this together, and we have just given way too much power to these corporate interests. And then to me, it starts looking like legacy because, not too long ago, I started hearing people talking, wow, the Obama legacy. I don't care about anyone's legacy. What I care about is how we make people's lives better. And Democrats had better heed the message, and Republicans as well. This trade agreement is not good, as I've read. And now, like Mike Dolan pointed out, we don't know everything that's in it. Maybe it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if it were the greatest thing since sliced bread, why aren't you showing us what's in it? That's what's frustrating to me, because I know when you get 600 corporate lobbyists together, I'm sorry, trade advisors, there's nothing in it for me or you or working people in general. We're just cogs in the wheel, and that's the frustrating part about this. I am not anti-trade, but I'm also not. I'm not willing to give away the baby in the bathwater. You know, I've had people say, "Well, you're an isolationist." And, well, no, I'm not an isolationist. I'm kind of a protectionist. I am. It's like when I leave my house, I lock my door because I'd like the stuff to stay in it be there when I get back. I haven't dug a huge moat with alligators, but I do lock my door. I mean, we've got to be conscientious on one level of what kind of an economy we're going to have for people here, and be judicious in what countries we compete with. This idea that we can have complete and total open borders just to me seems flawed. Now, moving toward that to where you can raise the living standards of the rest of the world, I can see how you can make an argument for that. But I don't know that this is the argument that they're giving us. And you got to ask how far does that benevolence go? So we've got a lot to do. That's why I think this week is so important as we look at the week of action to stop fast track. And again, if you want more information on it, stopfasttrack.com is the website. We've got links at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on either Mike Dolan or Stan Sorscher's name. It'll take you right there. Gonna take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit about net neutrality. I got some questions, and I think I found the person who might be able to answer those questions. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
This is a fading American dream. I got no time now to glorify now. Before a second chance, come on the dance floor. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous. The salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen! Chances are, when you took a shower this morning and
It is believed that a little hard work is good for the soul. If this is true, then the history of child workers in the United States is a soulful tale. The first child laborers landed in Virginia in the year 1619. These immigrant children found slave working conditions and poverty wages in their new world. As the years passed, little changed. The average child worker toiled 16 to 18 hours per day, 6 days a week in factories and textile mills. Education was a luxury, and many believed a loss on working children. Charles Harding, president of the Merchants Woolen Company, stated, "There is such a thing as too much education for working people sometimes. I have seen cases where young people are spoiled for labor by too much refinement." Labor unions, consumer groups, and parent coalitions all work to shorten hours, ease conditions, and ultimately end exploitive child abuses. Baby strikes in Paterson, New Jersey, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, demanding 11 and 12-hour workdays were fought vehemently by mill and factory owners. The Pennsylvania legislature was the first to consider prohibiting child workers in 1833, and consider is all Pennsylvania did until July of 1903, when Mother Jones led the March of the Mill Children from Philadelphia to Oyster Bay, New York, in an attempt to influenced President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1836, Massachusetts was the first state to pass a law restricting the use of children in manufacturing. And 102 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Walsh-Healy Act restricting the use of child labor is constitutional. Also in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which put more stringent restrictions on the use of child labor. While hard work teaches discipline, self-reliance, and responsibility, the exploitive nature of our past must remind us that what we have today, we mustn't take for granted, for the days of tomorrow are doomed to repeat if we ignore those lessons hard learned. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
Maybe not the end right now, but as we've been talking about these free trade agreements, I kind of got to make you wonder. Got to make you wonder about the control of what we can do within our borders, what laws we can pass, and all that. Anyway, welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Big news yesterday, especially for my techie friends who net neutrality is a huge issue. And look, here at the program, we're keenly aware of what it means to programs like ours to give the big moneyed interests more power and control over the internet. So I was happy to see the president come out and say that he was strongly in favor of net neutrality and laid out some very strong positions on throttling and all kind of things. But here to talk a little bit about it, I figured we need an expert on this, not just me rambling on. I've asked Brandy Collins. She's the Media Justice Director over at Color of Change. Brandy, thanks for taking time for us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So this, to my techie friends, this is huge news. This is like winning the Super Bowl or the lottery altogether. Good stuff, I think.
Yeah, no, it was big news. It was funny because I kind of went through my Sunday, and then I opened up my email at like 5 a.m. on Monday, and it had completely blown up. And everybody was like, "Did you see the video? Did you hear what the president said? This is big. This is a game changer." And it was exciting to see. It was glad. We were glad to know that the president has made a strong statement about this. But as Wheeler astutely points out, Chairman Wheeler at the FCC, they're an independent regulatory body, so the ball is in their court now to do what's right.
But in my view, this is like one of the first times that he's come out really strongly and said what his thoughts on this are, right?
Yeah, I mean, before he was elected president, he had come out and said that net neutrality was a priority, and he has touched on it in the past, but definitely this definitive statement around Title II and classifying the internet as a public utility, he hasn't. So yeah, this was and acknowledging that the internet is like a utility, not a luxury, as it's kind of been framed in the past.
Right. I talked about
it was really big time.
No, that is big. And I talked about it yesterday, and I got a number of emails from folks going, well, reclassifying it may not be the answer because according to the emails that businesses pay far more than residential people pay, and it's not fair, and it's all this stuff. I think it's probably not a bad idea to regulate it as a utility. Now, you've got the likes of Ted Cruz, who have said net neutrality is like Obamacare for the internet, which is kind of, I guess, why not throw Benghazi in there too? But I look at this and I got to go. I don't think I mind if that's the case because I have a business phone line. They're about the same. I don't think I mind residential customers paying a little bit less than big businesses.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was funny about the comment about Obamacare. I mean, it's not really the same, but I also just think it's funny in general that access for everyone is such a controversial thing. But yeah, I think what's important to kind of note here is that the internet right now, even though Title II classification hasn't gone into effect, it's not a revolutionary act to make it Title II. It's pretty much keeping the internet open and free as it is right now and making sure that that folks, that corporations can't really come in and treat the internet like it's some sort of newspaper where they have the power to dictate what news and information you receive and consume, that all of that all of our information travels at the same speed. And in fact, there's studies out there that kind of show that this isn't going to have this like devastating impact to big businesses and in the way that it's being framed, but that it's going to keep the internet this space for innovation and this place where small business owners and folks can continue to put out their own, products and information, and that's not blocked by larger corporations. So
let me ask you this, Brenda, because you're talking about what could be, and I think I have a problem with people not being able to imagine what could be. I fear that people don't think that, it's the way it's going to be, and it'll be fine, nothing will change. And I think the analogy of newspapers is spot on. That everything that's in there seems to be driven by what the advertisers want and not what's actually going on. And to me, that's a huge fear point, to where more of our media and more of where we get our information from is controlled by a smaller number of people. Not saying that the internet isn't really kind of heavily leveraged already. I think it would just make it much worse.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, so like 90% of the media that we consume right now is currently owned by, I think, like 6 corporations. And so most of what you see and read on a daily basis are coming from like these 6 corporations out there. And the internet really has been this platform that's allowed for a certain amount of innovation, that's allowed for independent voices, for, podcasts like the Rick Smith Show to kind of thrive. And anything that would put a cap on that or would hinder that in some way, I just think would be devastating. It'd be devastating to working folks and to people of color and to anybody who wants to be able to hold corporations and government accountable, that wants to have a voice, to be able to speak out, to say that could in any way be slowed down or hindered at the whim of the Comcast and Verizons of the world, I think is a little alarming, and we should all be worried about that.
No, I mean, this last election, the Comcasts of the world did wildly well with all of the advertising, TV advertising that went on. And I look at these growing behemoths, and to me, I worry about that more than anything. The growing concentration of messaging, the growing concentration of information in the information age. Because, I just had someone the other day saying, well, we don't need to teach kids like we used to in the old grill and drill days. We just need to teach them how to navigate the internet. I'm going, no, because I want them to be able to evaluate what it is that's being put on the internet. Because here I fear that the only thing they see is that corporate message. I mean, I looked up a resort the other day, a couple of days ago. My wife and I were thinking about going away for a weekend. All I see now are pop-up ads everywhere from them. I can't imagine it being much worse than it is now.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that without any sort of protections for the internet, it could get a lot worse. But I think we're going into issues around sort of privacy and what's allowed in terms of how your information is taken,
right,
and used against you in different ways. I mean, it's basically like the wild, wild west out there, and without some form of regulatory authority, it will continue to get worse. And certainly when left to the big corporations to decide what gets put in front of you, there's definitely the potential for it to be a lot worse. And I think the thing that is important to remember about this too is that, the Ted Cruz's and the Boehners of the world have kind of frame this as a party issue. It's not a party issue. Like Time just came out and said that the majority of conservatives are in favor of net neutrality. I think we all want to be counted. We all want to be visible. We all want to have a certain amount of self-determination. And right now the internet is like maybe the only places where we still have some amount of freedom in that.
See, I would like to see the regulations in another direction, as you pointed out with privacy. I feel now that somebody's always watching you. And I'm sure that will always happen. I know there are some people who think that being on the internet, you're anonymous. You're not, unless you're really smart and can figure out how to do all that stuff you see on TV, which I'm obviously not. But I don't think I want someone collecting all of the data and all the websites I visit and all of the things to sell me more goods, because that inevitably is where I think things end up.
Yeah, it's really super funny because I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and there's almost this expectation we have now that like privacy is the currency you pay for entry into, online socialization. And we have these ideas that we have basic civil rights, right? Like when we go out into the world, that we have certain freedoms and rights, and that we sacrifice those when we go online. I mean, that's kind of the way it feels right now, but it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think that that's like another huge issue that maybe some of those folks out there don't want to get too deep in the weeds about, but that's definitely something that we at Color of Change are looking at and thinking about, with our partners, and that's definitely the next fight, or the fight that's already unfolding.
So let me ask you the other side of this, because I'm cynical and jaded. If you haven't already been able to tell that,
me too.
I look at the president's timing. I've been waiting for years for this. We've had numerous guests on the program over the years talking about net neutrality and all of this. And it's curious to me that now the timing, while he's in China trying to push the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement and negotiate that, it's interesting the timing because as I understand, once we sign into this global agreement, which will eventually be a global agreement, that any of these type of things that we pass with a global commodity like the internet would be overshadowed by the global agreement. FCC be damned. Yeah.
It's interesting because I kind of just heard that, and I took his timing to actually be more tied to the elections and more, he put out this speech where he talked about being in the fourth quarter and that he wasn't this sort of lame duck, that he was going to go harder. And I thought I took this as like taking a stand and saying, no, maybe, the Republicans have won the midterm elections, or however you want to frame it. But we still have work to do. Like, I still have a legacy. And I think that he really wanted to make a definitive statement that he wants to serve the people, and he wants to listen to the 4 million folks out there that have already said they want net neutrality. And what's interesting about the Fair Trade Agreement, and I'm definitely not an expert, so I can't go too deep in the weeds on it, but I can say internationally, folks around the world are already looking at the internet as a public utility. Like the UN even put out a statement a couple of years ago that access to the internet is like a human rights issue.
Yes.
So in the way, the U.S. is actually behind where the rest of the world is in terms of this.
So if I were to take your line of reasoning, of which I hope you're right, I would want them to go to the Harry Truman way of thinking. Let's make sure that if it is a utility, that every home in the country has it, much like Truman did with electricity, getting electricity into every home. We should make sure that the internet and Wi-Fi access through communities and cities should be everywhere in the country, since it is such a big deal and it is the future. Shouldn't we be moving in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are groups out there like the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and other folks that are working on, community broadband issues. And I think that's where we need to go. Like when you look at the fact that I think I saw a poll that said that something like 70% of teachers, it might even be more now, assign homework that requires internet access. And then you have so many folks that don't have internet access. We've heard stories about kids in Mississippi that have to go miles outside of the city to get to a public library just to do their homework, hoping they get there before it closes. Like it is a public utility. It's something that you can't even apply for a job without the internet. Like it's such an important part of our life. And I think we have a hard time catching up to that because it's happened so quickly.
Right.
Like when I was in school, when I was in college, I didn't even have an email address. And now I can't start my day without looking at my email. Like it's advanced so quickly that I think it's hard for us to wrap our head around it, but it's here and we need it and we absolutely have to protect it.
And my fear is that by not having that neutrality, as quickly as it happened, it unhappens, and we end up with something much different than what we've come to expect today.
Absolutely.
So how do we help push? Is there a way for us to get Thomas Wheeler on the right page? Is there a way to to push for this?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of folks involved in this. Color of Change, where I'm at, we have an action that we already have live, and we're getting ready to push it out again. Folks like Free Press have been working on this forever, and they have actions. We actually have field hearings that are coming up in different places. I know that there was one that just happened in Philadelphia recently, but for folks listening outside of Pennsylvania, there are field hearings coming up. Voices for Internet Freedom is another place where you can find out information. But yeah, like keep talking to the FCC, keep looking at those actions, keep making your voice heard, because it does matter. And we really need Chairman Tom Wheeler to step into this and make a decision, not like next year, but right now. We need this to happen right now.
There you go. Brandy, I appreciate you taking time for us, giving us a little bit of background and filling us in a little bit. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks so much. Brandy Collins, Media Justice Director at Color of Change. Their website, colorofchange.org. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
A big surprise in this year's elections is that American politics has become dominated by the least likely of participants, shy people. That's strange, since running for office is an ego game, attracting those at ease with self-promotion. But the hot new trend is to campaign anonymously, not even whispering your name to voters. Of course, these are not the campaigns of actual candidates, nor are the campaigners even people. Rather, they are corporations, empowered by the Frankensteins on our Supreme Court to possess the political rights of us real human-type people. Using their shareholders' money, corporate entities are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to elect or defeat whomever they choose. You would know these corporations, for they are major brand names from big oil, big food, big pharma, etc. Normally, they're not at all bashful about promoting their corporate brands, but shh, they want to be totally secretive about their massive spending to decide who holds office in America. They realize that their self-serving campaigns would alienate their customers, employees, and shareholders, so they're keeping their involvement hush-hush. One agency could compel them to reveal their spending on what amounts to a corporate coup of our democratic elections, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC is supposed to guard the right of investors to know how corporate executives are spending their money. But this watchdog isn't barking, much less biting, thus allowing CEOs to take unlimited amounts of other people's money without their permission and secretly pour it down the darkest hole in American politics. This is Jim Hightower saying, SEC's inaction is gutless, making it complicit in the corporate corruption of our governing system. To help make it do its duty, link up with Public Citizen at www.citizen.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Time for change. It's time to rearrange.
Keeping the chambers of commerce within their gated communities. The Rick Smith Show.
You can't tell me we're gonna make it somehow. I heard a wise man say revolution starts now. I think it's time for change.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So the good news is no Ebola left in the U.S. The only case of Ebola left, gone. I guess this Dr. Craig Spencer no longer has the Ebola virus. He was evidently discharged from the hospital today. So that brings the number to exactly, let me think about it, do the math, zero. So the calls for the travel bans, which I find interesting, and not happening. But, here again, I look at this doctor, and this doctor's case is pretty interesting to me in that, as soon as he goes, I'm starting to get a temperature, he raced right to the hospital. And voluntarily, kind of sequestered himself. And there's a part of me that goes, if I know I'm coming from that part of the world where I'm exposed to this, I'm going to sequester myself from my loved ones and everyone else anyway, because I don't want them to get it. But there's also the other part that I worry about, the big scare, that we end up locking people up in internment camps or stuff like that. And it's one of those interesting moments. But what this did highlight for me anyway is how unprepared we are for epidemic, how unprepared we are for infectious disease. And as I've talked about in the past, when I was in the hospital back 2 years ago, and they wanted to put me in a room with a guy with MRSA. And I'm going, wait a minute, that's an infectious disease. Oh, but the chances of you getting it are fairly slim. I'm going, but this is a hospital where all the germs are. I'm already in a vulnerable position because I'm ill. You're going to put me in this room with a guy with MRSA, really? And then they saw my way of thinking and moved me out of the room and left this person alone. And I kept coming back to, it's all about the money. It's just about the profit. It's just about, we need to fill the rooms and fill the beds, and it's just about the money. Which is why I think it's good, and it's something that needs to happen. That the National Nurses United today, 18,000 nurses from Kaiser Permanente owned hospitals and clinics in Northern California went on strike today, just to inform people at how unprepared we are, and B, to say, hey, hospitals, you need to start preparing your staff, your facilities. I was literally shocked when the guy went to the hospital in Texas that someone said, I'm coming from this kind of a country, and I may have been exposed to Ebola, that immediately they didn't grab him and sequester him and have people who had the proper garb to make sure that he was going to be not dangerous to anyone else, because he was showing symptoms at the time. And you got to wonder if there's going to be a lawsuit now, because they did send that guy away. But here's the thing. The nurses say that they want full body hazardous material suits. They want specific medical standards and powered air filtration masks. That stuff to be available in hospitals nationwide. And I asked the question, why isn't it already? If your job is to make sure that you have the protective gear for whatever happens, shouldn't that stuff just be sitting on the shelf somewhere just in case? Shouldn't you be having trainings on, just in case? Because, Ebola isn't the only infectious disease out there. So now you've got the National Nurses United, who represents about 190,000 nurses across the country, saying, hey, look, we want to make sure that our people and all nurses are safe. Now, as I have thought, this is another one of those examples of privatization that has run amok. We have now got, instead of community-run hospitals, that's for the benefit of the community, where I think these things would have been maybe a little bit better handled. Maybe we'd be thinking a little bit further in advance. You've got corner cutters who are looking at, hey, how can we save a quick buck today? so that we can put it in the pockets of our shareholders and make sure that we have a good Christmas. I'm a bit frustrated by this, because for all of the talk and all of the we need to stop flights and we need to sequester people, we haven't really pointed, in my view, enough at the hospitals and the preparedness, which is why I think what these nurses are doing is fantastic, and probably could only really happen in Northern California. But I'm hoping across the country we're going to start seeing more people, because as I understand, there are more of these events planned for tomorrow. In fact, as I've been told, tomorrow in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a planned strike. And look, the idea is the more we can bring awareness to this, the better off it's going to be. But from my perspective, it still comes down to this privatization. It still comes down to the moneyed interests being able to be the deciders, if you will. Anyway, so there we go. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Again, this is the Stop Fast Track Week of Action. We will be talking about it all week long because I think it's that important of an issue. I think it is the defining issue of this time right now. If we get another NAFTA-like deal on a much larger scale, I fear we that envious middle class we used to have, that people still think we do, I think it goes away. And that is a huge fear. But if you missed any portion of the program today, thericksmithshow.com. I'll get the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. I appreciate you being here. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow night.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com.